Yo, what's up, guys? It's Adam, and today, oh man, we're diving into 5 Reddit stories that belong in a whole different universe. Like the type of stories where you pause the video halfway and just stare at the wall, like, bro, people are actually living like this? And we're kicking it off strong with my best friend betrayed me in silence, so I uncovered the truth that blew up his entire life. Nothing hurts more than quiet betrayal, except finding out the reason behind it was 10 times worse. Then we slide into my family treated me like a backup plan until I became the only one they needed. This one has the kind of petty satisfaction that tastes better than cold revenge. After that, I played broke for 5 years, and what I found out was terrifying. Let me tell you, nothing exposes people like fake poverty. Some folks switch up faster than a Wi-Fi signal in a storm. But we're not done. My boss thought I was easy to bully, so I used every trick he tried on me, and destroyed him with it. This story is basically a corporate revenge movie that never got funded. And finally, the nuclear one. I found out my partner was living a double life, so I exposed every lie in one night. This isn't even a plot twist, this is a whole character arc collapsing in real time. And that's just the lineup. Every single story today goes from normal to what the actual hell in seconds. So, grab your snacks, lock in, and let's get straight into story 1. My boss thought I was easy to bully. So I took everything he used against me and turned it back on him. I still remember my first day at Northbridge Analytics, walking into the glass building in downtown Seattle with my little notebook, my new badge clipped neatly to my sweater, and the kind of cautious optimism only a 29-year-old who spent 3 years freelancing in coffee shops can have. And if I had known that this place would turn into the most psychologically exhausting yet life-changing battleground of my career, I probably would have turned around and joined the bakery across the street instead, but back then I was eager, quiet, observant, the kind of person who took pride in accuracy and genuinely believed that if you worked hard and stayed kind, people would treat you with basic decency, which is exactly why someone like Daniel Reeves noticed me before I even realized he was watching. Daniel, my new boss, the senior operations lead, the man who smiled like a motivational speaker on LinkedIn but stared at you like you were an inconvenience in real life, was already infamous in the office. Every new hire felt the tremor of his presence before ever entering his department, with rumors of him being demanding, results-driven, and intense, the corporate euphemisms people use when they're too afraid to say narcissistic, manipulative, and fundamentally toxic. So when he shook my hand and introduced himself as the guy who will turn you into a star performer, I mistook that for mentorship instead of a red flag with LED lights, fireworks, and a marching band. He began targeting me almost immediately, and at first I didn't even realize it was happening, because it started subtly, like when he asked me to put together a preliminary data set for a client analysis, just so he could get a sense of my skills, promising he'd look it over with me later, only for me to discover during our department meeting that he'd used my entire work, slides and all, word for word, in his presentation to the executives, acting like he created it from scratch, not even acknowledging my existence, while the directors praised him for being so thorough. And when I asked him privately about it after the meeting, hoping maybe he forgot or would give me a hint of recognition, he looked at me with this practiced confusion, like I'd asked him about quantum physics and said, "Ava, you gave me rough numbers, not a finished product. If you want credit next time, you need to take initiative." Planting the seed that I was incompetent or overestimating my own work. That was the start, and from there, everything became a pattern. He kept assigning me deadlines that required 3 people's worth of labor, insisting they were easy tasks, then chastising me in meetings for not finishing them fast enough, or worse, finishing them too well and then watching him take the glory, all while whispering to other teams that I was a junior analyst with lots of potential but no real-world execution skills, which confused everyone because I wasn't junior at all. But since he controlled the narrative, people believed him before they ever spoke to me. And the isolation grew like mold in a forgotten corner. One time, I spent 4 nights building an interactive dashboard for a transportation client, barely sleeping, surviving off microwave ramen and cold brew, only for Daniel to change the meeting time without telling me and then tell the clients the dashboard wasn't ready because Ava needs more training, which made me want to sink through the floor. And when I confronted him about not informing me, he smirked, actually smirked, and said, "You should check your calendar more carefully. It's unprofessional to miss updates." Even though I had email notifications turned on and there was no update to miss. And when I asked a coworker if she got an email, she quietly told me Daniel handled it privately and maybe he forgot to loop me in, but the way she said it told me she didn't believe that explanation either. He also did this thing during one-on-ones where he'd compliment me in the first 5 minutes and then spend the remaining 20 tearing down everything I'd done, calling me too emotional, too hesitant, too soft-spoken, suggesting I wasn't a good cultural fit for a high-performance environment, and no matter how much data I brought to back up my decisions, he'd raise his eyebrows like I was a child showing him finger paintings, telling me that confidence mattered more than correctness, which was hilarious considering he had no idea how half the software worked, and regularly asked me to explain the techie part in dumb people terms. except he'd later relay that explanation to higher-ups as if it had come from his brilliant analytical mind. Worst of all were the rumors, things I didn't even realize were coming from him until much later, like how someone from another department asked me if I was still struggling with the client metrics, even though I'd never struggled with anything of that sort. Or when a team lead mentioned she heard I was still adjusting to the workload, even though I consistently produced more than most analysts on the team. And that's when I realized Daniel wasn't just controlling my workload, he was shaping the entire perception of me behind my back, constructing a narrative where I was a burden he heroically tolerated. I tried to handle things the right way, like a rational adult, and went to HR after a particularly humiliating incident where he sabotaged my slides before a presentation, causing the chart to display mismatched data and making me look unprepared in front of the client. But HR gave me the corporate sympathy nod, the kind where their eyes softened but their voices flattened, and said Daniel was highly valued, that he had a reputation for being direct, and I might need to toughen up or improve communication alignment, which is HR language for, we're not touching this, good luck. And it hit me right then that the system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly how it was designed, protecting the loudest, most charming snakes while the quiet ones like me were expected to adapt. I walked out of that HR office shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that I was alone in a battlefield I didn't even know I'd stepped into. And for a brief moment, I considered quitting, just walking away and saving my sanity. But something inside me snapped. Not emotionally, but strategically, because I suddenly understood exactly what type of man Daniel was. Someone who relied on people underestimating themselves and overestimating him. Someone who thrived on chaos, confusion, and his polished reputation. And most importantly, someone who had grown so comfortable in his power that he didn't bother covering his tracks anymore. That was the day everything changed. The day I stopped reacting and started observing, because I realized the only way to beat someone like him wasn't to confront him head on. It was to let him build his tower of lies high enough that it collapses under its own weight. And so I began quietly recording everything, documenting every request, saving every Slack message, collecting timestamped files, screenshotting changes he made, tracking inconsistencies, storing emails in a separate encrypted drive, and pretending, very convincingly, to be the same overwhelmed, timid Ava he thought he could walk all over because he expected me to break. But instead, I went invisible, calculated, deliberate. Little did Daniel know, while he thought he was tightening the noose, I was already looping it back around his neck, beginning a 5-month undercover strategy that would eventually expose every lie he'd ever told and every manipulation he thought he'd gotten away with. A strategy he would never see coming because he believed he was the predator. But he'd already chosen me as the perfect target, and he had no idea I was about to become his biggest threat. The shift from being Daniel's favorite punching bag to becoming the invisible architect of his downfall didn't happen overnight. But the moment I stopped reacting emotionally and started observing like a scientist dissecting a specimen, everything around me sharpened into focus. And I began noticing connections, patterns, and cracks that previously blurred together under stress. It started with people, quiet conversations, subtle comments, stories whispered after meetings, the type of confessions people only share when they feel safe. And as I slowly earned the trust of coworkers who had once kept their distance because of Daniel's rumors about me, I discovered a growing list of employees he'd fired unfairly or pushed out with psychological warfare. People who felt powerless, humiliated, and dismissed, like Maya from finance, who told me Daniel had blamed her for a budgeting error he himself created. Or Ethan from data engineering, who said Daniel rewrote his project documentation and then accused him of inconsistency to justify termination. And when these former employees realized I wasn't just venting but actively gathering information, many of them sent me old emails, Slack screenshots, even project files he'd tampered with, all of which quietly added fuel to a fire I was building brick by brick. Inside the office, the person who shifted everything for me was Leah, a senior project manager with 10 years of experience and a reputation for being brutally honest in the best possible way. She pulled me aside one day after a meeting Daniel had derailed and whispered, "He's setting you up the same way he tried with me 3 years ago. Don't let him." And that moment turned her from a passing acquaintance into one of my strongest allies, someone who didn't just dislike Daniel's methods, but despised the way he preyed on people with less power. She started pointing out inconsistencies in his reports, nudging me toward documentation loopholes he overlooked, and helping me understand the political landscape of the company, the unspoken alliances, the people who mattered, and the people Daniel thought he owned. Then came Rebecca, the new HR rep. A quiet woman with glasses who didn't smile much but paid attention to everything. And unlike the old HR director, who practically worshipped Daniel's aggressive leadership style, Rebecca actually listened when I approached her casually about workplace culture, asking innocence-loaded questions like, "What's your policy on digital asset ownership?" Or, "If someone alters official documentation, where should that be reported?" And her responses were deliberate, careful, almost as if she was hinting without violating protocol, which made me realize she had probably heard whispers about Daniel already but needed proof that couldn't be dismissed by corporate favoritism. But the most important lines came from the outside, from a major client named Pacific Coast Transit, a firm that relied heavily on our predictive modeling software and had been quietly frustrated with Daniel's overpromises, like when he guaranteed a 2-week turnaround that should have taken 6, or when he delivered incomplete projections disguised as beta drafts, and the project manager on their team, a sharp guy named Luis, sent me a private message after a meeting asking if I could clarify some discrepancies in the data Daniel had presented, discrepancies I had never seen because Daniel had taken my final dataset, replaced half the metrics with inflated numbers, and passed it off his final analysis. Luis wasn't angry. He was concerned, and when I explained I hadn't been informed of those changes, he sighed and said, "Thought so. This guy's been playing fast and loose with our deliverables," which made him an unexpected but crucial ally because client complaints carry more weight than internal ones. From that point forward, I collected everything. Organized folders labeled by date, timestamped versions of files Daniel altered, Slack messages where he contradicted himself, emails where he promised deliverables without CCing the team, even recordings of virtual meetings, legal in Washington with one-party consent, where his tone shifted drastically depending on whether executives were present or not. And with every piece I collected, Daniel became sloppier, assuming I was the timid, overwhelmed worker he could abuse without consequence. His biggest mistake came when he sabotaged one of my projects so blatantly it almost cost me my job. He reassigned key tasks without telling me, removed critical data from our shared drive, and then blamed me in front of the entire leadership team, saying I had dropped the ball and ignored protocol. And while I kept my expression neutral, inside I was noting every word, every lie, every witness in the room who saw his performance. And the best part was that I had the original timestamps of his deletions, the Slack messages he sent only to certain team members, and the version history that proved the data had been altered from his account, not mine. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from a cold clarity that settled over me like armor, because Daniel wasn't just exposing his cruelty, he was documenting it for me. After that incident, I spent nights analyzing his behavior like a data model, noting how he lied to clients whenever he needed to save face, how he manipulated metrics to make failures look like near successes, how he created fake crises to swoop in as the hero, how he stole intellectual property from junior staff and repackaged it as his own, and how he violated HR policy so regularly he probably didn't even remember what the rules were anymore. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized Daniel didn't just operate unethically, he operated predictably, like a system with flawed logic, and if you understood the pattern, you could anticipate his next move. The irony was that while he thought I was unraveling, I was actually weaving together the tightest trap possible, one that required patience, timing, and absolute precision, because taking down someone like him wasn't about one dramatic confrontation. It was about engineering a downfall that looked spontaneous, inevitable, and completely self-inflicted, like watching a tower collapse after someone removes the wrong brick. And Daniel, blinded by ego, was already pulling out the bricks himself, unaware that I was quietly gathering every single one. By the time the trap finally closed around Daniel Reeves, it felt less like revenge and more like watching gravity correct something that had been defying the laws of the workplace for far too long. Because everything I've been building, every documented timestamp, every quiet alliance, every strategic question asked at the right moment had led to a point of no return that Daniel walked straight into with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. And it all began when Pacific Coast Transit, the client he'd been misleading for months, filed a formal complaint that I had quietly guided into motion not by manipulating them, but simply by answering their questions honestly when they asked why projections didn't match deliverables. I sent them the real data, the unedited charts, the actual timelines, and when they compared those to Daniel's fabricated promises, they realized they had been strung along by someone who cared more about looking successful than delivering results. And their complaint went straight to upper management, bypassing Daniel entirely, which was perfect because he didn't know a fire had already been lit behind him. The second spark came when Rebecca from HR initiated a formal investigation, triggered not by emotion, but by a meticulously organized packet I provided. Screenshots, Slack logs, version histories, meeting recordings, even project files showing metadata that exposed how Daniel had edited, deleted, or overwritten documents minutes before blaming me for missing information. And because HR couldn't bury evidence this explicit without opening themselves to liability, they had no choice but to escalate it. Then, like dominoes, Coworkers who had once been too afraid to speak began submitting confidential statements, recounting incidents they'd witnessed over the years, moments he'd screamed at junior staff, times he'd taken credit for entire teams' work, manipulation tactics he used to pressure people into silence, even records of him altering metric reports during client reviews, and the effect was like a dam breaking. Suddenly, HR wasn't dealing with isolated incidents, but consistent patterns stretching across multiple departments and years. On top of that, Leah, the senior project manager who hated his methods, asked for a quality review of Daniel's deliverables after noticing discrepancies in his quarterly reporting. And upper management assigned the review to a senior manager named Victor, a calm, numbers-driven man who had no patience for inflated data or missing documentation. And when Victor compared Daniel's reports to the raw data sets I'd provided discreetly, the discrepancies were so blatant. Numbers rounded to hide errors, trends smoothed to look more successful, risk metrics downgraded without justification, that he flagged the entire report for audit, which triggered a meeting Daniel didn't know was designed to expose him from the moment he stepped into it. The meeting was packed. HR, 2 directors, the VP of operations, Victor, and Daniel himself, who walked in smiling, holding his coffee like this was just another chance to brag about his strong leadership, while I sat quietly at the table with my laptop closed, hands folded, expression neutral, because I knew everything was about to unfold like a slow-motion car crash he had engineered himself. The VP began by pulling up client correspondence on the screen, including the complaint Pacific Coast Transit filed, and I watched Daniel's face twitch for half a second before he recovered with a charming laugh, saying the client was confused, misinterpreting drafts, and possibly overwhelmed with technical details. But then Victor opened the raw data files, the exact versions with unaltered metadata, and started comparing them side by side with the falsified reports Daniel submitted to executives, and the room went dead silent, except for Daniel stuttering as he tried to explain why the numbers didn't match, claiming there were last-minute updates, except the timestamp showed the files had been edited at 2:13 a.m. from his login, long after the submissions were finalized. He tried to redirect blame toward me, saying I was still learning and probably misunderstood the data structure, but that's when the Slack messages appeared on screen. His messages telling me to stay out of client communication, another where he explicitly ordered me not to touch the data set, and another where he insulted me to a coworker, calling me slow and high maintenance, which HR noted as harassment. The more he talked, the deeper the hole became, because every lie he tried to spin was countered with digital receipts pulled up instantly, emails proving he stole credit from my dashboard, recordings where he told clients features existed that weren't even developed yet, project logs showing he reassigned tasks without notifying the team, even calendar invitations he forgot to send me, and the effect was surreal. Like watching a live crime documentary where the suspect keeps confessing accidentally. Daniel's composure cracked first at the edges, tightened jaw, trembling fingers, a sweat line forming at his collar, then completely shattered as he began raising his voice, accusing HR of conspiring against him, accusing Victor of targeting him, accusing me of sabotage, mumbling about lawsuits, discrimination, slander, anything he could grab onto as the walls closed in. But the more he shouted, the more unprofessional he appeared, and the executives exchanged glances that said everything without words. The VP calmly asked him to explain why the client had recordings, actual audio, of him promising deliverables the team never approved. And when Daniel demanded to hear them, the VP played the first one, Daniel confidently assuring the client that Ava will finish the full predictive model in 3 days. Something he had never assigned to me, something he had publicly criticized me for when I didn't deliver it, something he had lied about repeatedly, and as his own voice filled the room, Daniel completely lost control, shouting that the recordings were doctored, that I manipulated audio files, that the clients were incompetent, and that HR was biased. But by then, it didn't matter what he said because the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, in one last desperate attempt, he pointed at me and yelled, "She's been out to get me from day one." And I simply opened my laptop, clicked a folder labeled documentation log, and projected a neatly organized timeline of 5 months of proof. Objective, calm, timestamped, unedited, everything from Slack messages to version histories to emails he never expected anyone to save, and the room went still. So quiet you could hear the subtle hum of the projector. The VP leaned back and said, "Daniel, this is extensive." And that was the moment it snapped shut, the moment he realized he wasn't walking out of that room with his title, reputation, or dignity. Within minutes, he was escorted out by security, screaming about being framed, threatening to sue the company, yelling at HR, spitting accusations at random employees in the hallway as everyone watched in stunned silence. And for days after, the office buzzed with a kind of collective relief, like someone had lifted a weighted blanket of stress off the entire building, because his downfall wasn't just a victory for me. It was vindication for everyone he had ever mistreated, and morale skyrocketed in a way I had never seen before. People smiling more, collaborating more freely, relaxing into their jobs without fear. And although I stayed quiet, professional, composed the entire time, inside I felt something shift. Not vindictive satisfaction, but a deep, steady sense of justice finally served. The day Daniel finally fell wasn't loud, dramatic, or wrapped in the kind of chaos he always brought into every room. It was quiet, surgical, almost unsettlingly calm, like a storm that had emptied itself long before anyone realized the damage was already done. And when HR escorted him out of the class conference room after the catastrophic presentation that exposed 5 months of his lies, the office didn't erupt in cheers or gasps. It exhaled, like everyone had been holding their breath since the day he'd arrived, and now their lungs finally remembered how to work. And while people tried to pretend they were focused on their screens, the energy felt like a champagne bottle someone had shaken for years and was now ready to burst. Management didn't make a formal announcement, but word spread instantly that Daniel Reeves, the man who thought he was untouchable, had been transitioned out immediately, which was corporate language for walked out before he could burn the place down. And I didn't celebrate or gloat or even smile, because the truth was, for months I had trained myself to stay still, stay unreadable, stay boring to him, and breaking character felt like touching a hot stove. Over the next week, small ripples of change started stacking into waves. The client I had quietly protected from Daniel's fake promises personally reached out to the VP of our firm, praising my integrity, transparency, and technical brilliance. 3 other teams emailed me asking if I consult on their data workflows, because word is you saved us from a PR nightmare. And the senior project manager, who had warned me early on about Daniel, shook my hand in the cafeteria and said, "You did the impossible, and you did it clean." HR called me in, not to interrogate or gaslight me this time, but to thank me. And the new HR rep, the only one who ever listened, said my documentation prevented at least 2 lawsuits, maybe more, and that my level of organization was something they'd use for future training, which felt surreal considering months earlier they were ready to sign off on Daniel's lies about me being incompetent. The biggest shock came when upper management scheduled a meeting with me where I expected some vague corporate platitudes, but instead, they offered me a role as a data operations lead, a position that paid significantly more and would give me the authority to clean up the systems Daniel had wrecked. And as they spoke, I realized this wasn't just recognition. It was relief, gratitude, and maybe even a little fear, because once you've seen the truth behind a narcissist's charm, you also see who ignored the warning signs. Suddenly, people from other departments were smiling at me in the hallways, treating me like the quiet legend who pulled off what half the office had secretly prayed for but never believed would happen. And I heard someone in the break room whisper, "That's her, the one who took down Daniel Reeves." And instead of shrinking the way I might have before, I just let the words float past me like a breeze that didn't need my attention. But the real shift wasn't the promotion or the respect or even the victory. It was the moment I sat alone in my new office, a glass-walled corner space overlooking downtown Seattle, and realized I wasn't scared anymore. The fear that had lived in my chest for months had evaporated, replaced by something steadier, sharper, like steel forged in fire. And as I organized my desk, I thought about how Daniel had underestimated me so completely, treating my silence as weakness, my soft voice as submission, my empathy as naivete, when really those were the exact things that let me study him, map his patterns, and dismantle him without ever raising my voice. I didn't ruin him, he ruined himself. I just made sure the right people finally saw it. And while some might call it revenge, to me it felt more like balance, the kind of justice that doesn't need noise or applause, only patience, precision, and the discipline to strike when the time is right. As I powered on my new workstation, sunlight spilling across the desk, I realized something quietly astonishing. The people who underestimate you hand you more power than the ones who support you, because their arrogance blinds them to the fact that you're watching, learning, and preparing. And when the moment comes, they'll never see it coming. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel small or overshadowed or afraid. I felt like someone who had walked through fire and learned she could control the temperature. Someone who didn't need to be loud to be dangerous. Someone who didn't need to fight dirty to win. Someone who finally understood that the world doesn't reward the loudest person in the room, it rewards the one who pays attention. So I closed the door to my office, sat down in my new chair, and let myself take a single, slow, steady breath, knowing I wasn't just free. I was finally, undeniably, unshakably in control. The end. Steady breath. Knowing I wasn't just free. I was finally, undeniably, unshakably in control. The end. I played broke for 5 years, and what I discovered about the people around me was terrifying. I was 22 when my entire life collapsed in a single Monday morning, the kind people later joke about, without knowing how close you came to losing everything. Because for me, it started with walking into the Los Angeles office of the tech company, where I'd spent 2 years believing I'd finally built stability, only to find security guards lined up like silent statues and HR acting like they'd never seen me before. all because the CEO got caught in a fraud investigation I had absolutely nothing to do with. Yet somehow, every low-level employee got dragged into the fallout. And by noon, I was packing my little desk plant and my cracked mug into a cardboard box while everyone whispered like we were criminals. And I remember sitting in my beat-up 2004 Honda Civic in the parking lot, staring at the pink slip they handed me, realizing I had only $2,864 in my bank account and no backup plan, no family who'd help, no partner, no safety net, not even a friend I could crash with for more than a night. So I drove to my tiny studio apartment that smelled like dust and broken dreams, lay on the floor and cried until my chest physically hurt because the rent was due in 8 days and there was no way I could afford another month. Within a week, I was selling old clothes, skipping meals, applying to 60 jobs a day and hearing nothing but, "We'll get back to you," which is corporate language for no. And the lowest moment came when I stood in line at a grocery store counting coins to buy ramen, pretending I'd forgotten my card just to walk away before anyone saw how broke I really was. And I swear that night I sat on the floor in the dark and thought, if I don't change something now, I won't make it. So I did something reckless, desperate, and maybe stupid. I took every dollar left after rent and put it into building a small prototype of an app idea I'd once scribbled on a napkin, something I thought could help small businesses automate their online scheduling. And even though I knew nothing about coding, I learned from YouTube, Reddit, free courses, and stayed awake until sunrise night after night, watching tutorials until my eyes burned. And when I wasn't coding, I was working shifts at a cafe where customers acted like I was invisible, snapping fingers for refills like I wasn't a human being with a collapsing life, then going home exhausted but forcing myself to keep building because failure hurt less than giving up. And I kept telling myself, it's this or nothing. The first version of the app was awful, but I kept improving it, testing it, rewriting entire sections of code until it finally worked, and the day a small boutique store emailed me saying, "This is exactly what we needed. Can we subscribe?" I almost fainted, and then another signed up, and another, and before I knew it, 20 businesses were using my little project, and one of them posted about it online, which caught the attention of a micro investor who asked if I'd ever considered scaling. And I lied and said, yes, absolutely, even though in reality I had no clue how to scale anything. But I figured out every step faster than I ever thought I could. And suddenly I was on Zoom calls with investors who thought I had potential. And then somehow checks started coming in, small at first, then bigger, and within a year my tiny, desperate idea had turned into a real company with real revenue. And the day I saw my bank balance hit 7 figures, I sat there in silence, not cheering, not screaming, just numb, because I realized the world only values you once you have something they want. But instead of upgrading my life or moving into some glossy LA condo, I did something no one expected. I hid everything. I kept living exactly like I had when I was broke. Thrift store jeans, worn sneakers, dollar menu dinners, the same dying Honda with a broken AC, and people's reactions were vicious. It was like being poor made me invisible, like I didn't exist, like I wasn't worth respect unless I was wearing brands or driving something shiny, and I watched how coworkers ignored me at the cafe, how people cut in front of me in lines, how strangers talked down to me, how friends stopped inviting me anywhere because I couldn't afford stuff. And I started seeing how differently the world treats you when they think you have nothing to offer. That was when the idea hit me. If people only show their real selves when they think you're beneath them, then maybe the only way to truly know who's real is to stay beneath them. So I made a promise to myself that night, sitting alone in my crappy apartment eating cold leftover pasta. I would keep my wealth hidden for 5 years. No upgrades, no hints, no lifestyle changes. I would let people assume I was broke, struggling, failing. I would let them reveal who they really were. I would watch quietly, carefully, without reacting. And the ones who stayed, who treated me with kindness, who didn't judge me based on a car or clothes or paycheck, those would be the people I'd keep for life. Everyone else, I let them expose themselves. And as I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights that didn't know I existed, feeling something sharp and new settle in my chest, a mix of anger, clarity, and determination, I whispered to myself with a smile I hadn't felt in months, let the game begin. At 23, when the weight of my secret wealth was still fresh and unfamiliar, I started noticing how the world around me rearranged itself, depending on whether it believed I was worth anything. And the first shift came through my friend Hannah, a girl I'd known since community college who used to come over for movie nights and wine and talk about how we'd both rise together, except once she thought I was broke. Because I never upgraded anything, she began treating me like I was her personal ATM, constantly asking, "Hey babe, can you spot me 20? I'll pay you back Friday." Except Friday never came, and then it wasn't 20, it was 50, then 70, then 100, and when I hesitated, she'd sigh dramatically like I was being selfish, saying, "You know I'm good for it," even though she absolutely wasn't. And I finally realized she didn't want friendship, she wanted a convenience, and I was the only idiot still giving her the benefit of the doubt. Meanwhile, other friends in our circle started creating group chats without me. posting pictures from brunches, concerts, beach trips, and rooftop parties I was never invited to anymore because, as one of them accidentally texted me, she can't afford the cover anyway, just leave her out. And I remember staring at that message in my dark room thinking, if only you knew I could buy the entire damn venue. But of course I never corrected them, because this was exactly the experiment I had committed to. Let them show their true colors. The roommate situation made everything worse. Her name was Kayla, and she was the type of girl who acted sweet until she didn't get what she wanted. Then suddenly, she had an attitude that filled the entire apartment. And one afternoon, I walked early from my cafe shift and caught her on my laptop, not browsing Netflix or Spotify, but digging through my emails and messages, clicking through private folders like she was looking for something incriminating, and when I demanded to know what she was doing, she didn't even look embarrassed. She just shrugged and said, I was trying to see if you're actually broke or if you're lying to get pity, and then added, or if you're one of those girls who secretly has a sugar daddy, which stunned me into silence because I realized she genuinely believed that was the most logical explanation for someone like me surviving in LA. And it was in that moment I understood how deep people's assumptions ran. If you don't flaunt wealth, they assume you're pathetic. But nothing stung as deeply as my first real relationship during this whole broke girl experiment, because his betrayal carved itself into me in a way I didn't expect. His name was Ryan, and at first he was the sweetest guy I'd met in years. Funny, attentive, patient, and acting like he didn't care that my car wheezed every time I turned it on, or that my thrift store clothes never matched. And during the first few months, I let myself believe he genuinely liked me for me. The version of me whose bank account allegedly had 2 digits instead of 7. And for a while, that felt safe, grounding. Like, maybe I wasn't crazy for trying to find real connections in a fake world. But slowly things shifted. He began making comments like, I wish you dressed a little nicer, or it's embarrassing when my friends ask why you never order anything but water. And whenever I reminded him I was trying to save money, he would roll his eyes like being frugal was a character flaw. And one evening, after we left a friend's birthday party, he snapped, you have to look so low class all the time. It makes me look bad. And I remember staring at him thinking, you have no idea how stupid you sound. But I swallowed my pride because the whole point of this experiment was to see who people were when they thought I had nothing. The final blow came 3 months later when I walked into his apartment unannounced because he asked me to pick up his charger and found him shirtless with a girl who looked like she stepped straight out of a Beverly Hills casting call. And they froze when they saw me, and she actually laughed, saying, oh my God, is that the charity case you told me about? Before pulling his blanket over herself like I was the intruder, and Ryan didn't even deny it. He just said, look, I need someone who matches my lifestyle, and added with a little shrug, you're sweet, but you were never going to fit in with my world. And the irony was so violent, I almost laughed because if he knew the truth, that I could outbuy every person in his life 10 times over, he might have fallen to his knees, but I didn't say a word. I just walked out, got into my rattling Honda, and let the humiliation dissolve into a strange kind of clarity. That was the night I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every insult, every betrayal. Not out of revenge, but because I wanted to remember exactly who people became when they thought I had nothing to offer them. It wasn't all darkness though. There was one light in that entire chaotic mess. A coworker at the cafe named Jordan, the kind of person who didn't talk much but always noticed when you were overwhelmed, replacing your shift quietly or slipping you an extra muffin before they throw them out anyway. One afternoon, a group of customers mocked my shoes, old, peeling, barely holding together, and I tried to laugh it off, but Jordan stepped between us and said, if you're done acting like middle school bullies, maybe order your coffee. And the way he said it, calm but firm, made the whole group instantly shut up. And after they left, he didn't ask if I was okay, didn't make it awkward, just handed me a cup of iced coffee and said, people show who they are when they think no one's watching. And I swear something in me softened right there. He never treated me like I was beneath him, never judged me for my car or clothes, never made comments about money. He was just genuine. And because of that, I started paying closer attention, not just to him, but to everyone. And what I saw over the next 2 years was a crash course in human nature. The greedy, the jealous, the selfish, the kind, the rare, loyal few. By the time I turned 25, I learned to read people like open books. And every fake friend, every manipulative roommate, every judgmental coworker, every shallow date had unknowingly helped me perfect the skill. The experiment was working. The mask was still on. And the next phase of my plan, watching how my own family would behave, was about to show me just how dark things could get. But at the end of that chapter of my life, as I packed my backpack after another long shift and saw Jordan give me a small wave goodnight, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a tiny, fragile seed of trust starting to grow. I was 25 when I moved from Los Angeles to a tiny apartment in San Diego, hoping a little distance from everyone would give me peace. But all it did was make it easier for my family to weaponize the idea that I had run away from responsibility. Because the moment they realized I was still living like someone who could barely afford groceries, they saw it as an invitation to treat me like the family failure. And it started slowly. My mom making comments like, "When are you going to grow up and get a real career?" Even though she had no idea my company had just crossed $10 million in annual profits, or my sister posting funny videos on Instagram mocking my thrift store outfits with captions like, "Imagine being almost 26 and still dressing like a clearance rack exploded." And the rest of my relatives chimed in with their group chats and phone calls accusing me of being lazy, unmotivated, and embarrassing the family, as if my entire worth was tied to the car I drove or the clothes on my back, and the irony was so sharp it could have cut glass because not a single one of them cared about the truth. They cared only about how I looked. But I held my tongue, kept my head down, and reminded myself this was part of the plan. See who people became when they thought I had nothing. My mom would call and deliver lectures that lasted hours, telling me how disappointed she was, how I'd wasted my degree, how my younger sister Vanessa was so much more successful, even though her success was mostly filters, sponsorships, and credit cards she couldn't afford. Every conversation ended with a variation of, "Why can't you be more like her?" And I'd just listen, staring at the peeling paint in my dingy San Diego rental. The kind of place where cockroaches scurried out when you turned the lights on and where the water heater wheezed like it had emphysema, thinking, if only you knew. But the worst part wasn't the criticism. It was how suddenly every single one of them started demanding that I contribute more to family expenses. And when I asked how they expected someone who they believed made minimum wage to help them with car payments, mortgage issues, vet bills, and spa visits, my aunt snapped, "It's not about money, it's about effort." Which was hilarious because they absolutely meant money. They were just too proud to say it out loud. They framed it as family duty, but really they thought I was naive enough to hand over the little I supposedly had, while Vanessa bragged online about her latest $300 nails and weekend getaways paid by men she pretended not to know. Still, I stayed quiet, stuck to the mask, and told myself the experiment would expose everything I needed to learn, but nothing prepared me for the day I found Vanessa trying to use my credit card behind my back. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd gone home to visit for a family brunch that turned into them complaining about my life choices for 3 hours. And at some point, I went upstairs to grab my jacket from my old bedroom, only to find my sister sitting on the floor, my wallet open next to her, typing my card number into her phone without the slightest hint of shame. When she realized I was standing there, she didn't apologize. She rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, I was just ordering something small." Then tried to justify it by saying, "You never spend money on yourself anyway, so what's the big deal?" And something inside me snapped so sharply I could physically feel it. I yanked the card from her hand and said, "Don't ever touch my stuff again." And she laughed in my face, telling me I was overreacting, calling me dramatic, before adding, "Honestly, you should be grateful anyone in this family even deals with you." And that line, hit harder than anything she'd ever said because it confirmed exactly how all of them saw me. Not as a daughter or sister or cousin, but as a burden. They didn't value me as a person. They valued me as a scapegoat to blame for everything wrong, a punching bag for their frustrations, a pathetic failure they could point to so they'd never have to confront their own flaws. And when I went downstairs, still shaking, hoping maybe anyone would ask if I was okay, they didn't. Instead, they were too busy complaining about how useless I was because I didn't bring anything to brunch, even though I'd brought pastries they didn't even touch. That night, I drove back to San Diego in silence, the Honda rattling like it was ready to fall apart. And when I walked into my apartment and saw a roach crawl across the floor like it was welcoming me home, I finally collapsed onto my mattress. No bed frame, just the mattress, and cried harder than I had since the day I lost my job at 22. And the sickest part was that even through the tears, I could feel this weight growing inside me. The weight of trying to hold two identities at once. The successful founder of a fast-scaling tech company on one side, and the embarrassment of my family on the other. The duality was tearing me apart, and hiding the truth was becoming harder every day. Every call from investors, every milestone my company hit, every wire transfer with more zeros than I'd ever dreamed of. It all felt hollow, because the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally treated me like the lowest form of disappointment. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if my experiment was a mistake. Not because of the fake friends or the betrayal from men, but because I wasn't prepared for the heartbreak of seeing my own family fail the test so spectacularly. I would sit at my tiny kitchen table, surrounded by peeling linoleum and cabinets that didn't close, scrolling through spreadsheets showing our profits crossing 10 million, reading messages from my team, celebrating growth milestones, and instead of feeling proud, I felt like an imposter in my own life, someone split in half. The world saw me as a powerful young CEO. My family saw me as a joke. And the more their cruelty intensified, the more pressure built inside me, like a kettle about to explode. But the breaking point, The moment everything changed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet night at 2 a.m., sitting on the floor with my laptop balanced on my knees, answering investor emails while listening to my upstairs neighbor scream at his girlfriend, the glow of the screen reflecting off tears I didn't bother wiping away when I finally whispered to myself, how much longer can I do this? Because I knew deep down I was nearing the edge of something, a threshold I couldn't uncross. And what terrified me most wasn't losing the mask. It was what would happen once it finally came off. I was 27 when everything I had been hiding for 5 years finally exploded into the open. And the funny thing is, I wasn't even trying to expose anything. I had planned on staying invisible forever, quietly running my company from behind my laptop in my tiny San Diego apartment, where the pipes rattled whenever the neighbors showered, and where a cockroach I named Gerald liked to steal crumbs off my countertop like he paid rent. But life doesn't really care about your plans, especially when it decides it's time to rip the mask off and force you to face every demon you've avoided. Which is exactly what happened the day my assistant called me from New York, panicked, breathless, saying, "You need to get on a plane. Now we won." And for a second, I genuinely thought she meant we won a free Starbucks drink or something stupid because that's where my brain lived at 7 a.m. But then she said it again slowly. We won the National Innovators Award, and my heart jumped into my throat because that award wasn't small, wasn't local, wasn't ignorable. It was broadcasted nationally. It was covered by every major tech outlet. It was a full red carpet type event with interviews and flashing cameras and CEOs who normally wouldn't give me a second glance, suddenly wanting to shake my hand, and there was no way for me to hide anymore. Not unless I faked my own death, though I admit I genuinely considered that for 2 whole minutes before booking the flight to New York, sitting in coach even though I could have bought the entire plane out of pure spite just to stay consistent with the broke girl image everyone believed I lived. And the whole time my leg wouldn't stop bouncing because I kept picturing the moment people realized the truth. That the daughter they mocked, the sister they humiliated online, the cousin they said would never amount to anything, the girl who supposedly lived off $12 salads and expired ramen was actually the founder of a company worth more than their entire family tree combined. When I landed in New York, a driver held a sign with my name on it, and even that made my stomach twist because I knew I couldn't explain that away if anyone from home saw it, but the award show was non-negotiable, mandatory, unavoidable. So I just breathed through it and let them take me to the venue where a stylist I didn't ask for got me ready and where a gown I didn't choose was waiting for me. Shimmering gold, expensive enough that my mother would have fainted if she touched it. And as I stepped onto the red carpet with cameras flashing in my face, the world learning, oh, that's her, I felt something in my chest shift. Not fear exactly, but something like grief mixed with relief, like a version of me was dying so another could breathe. The moment the photos hit the internet, my phone detonated. Calls, texts, voice notes, DMs across every platform, cousins I hadn't heard from since middle school, suddenly sending me paragraphs about how proud they were. Old coworkers asking if I remembered them, college roommates pretending we were besties when they used to steal my food, guys I rejected in 10th grade trying to flirt, my ex, the man who left me because I lacked ambition, sending me a shaky voice message saying he always believed in me. But worst of all was my family. My mother called 16 times in 1 hour, leaving messages swinging between rage and shock. Why didn't you tell us? Followed by, we need to talk about how much you can contribute now. Followed by, this family deserves support, which basically translated to, you owe us. My sister went nuclear online, posting screenshots of my red carpet photos with captions like, so this is what she was doing while pretending to be broke, lying to us, playing the victim role with Olympic level performance, and suddenly, people who used to laugh at me were accusing me of betrayal, as if hiding my success was a crime, as if my survival strategy was some intentional attack against them. Friends who ghosted me years ago sent long essays about how they misunderstood me. Coworkers who bullied me emailed congratulations, like I would forget the way they used to call me the office charity case. Neighbors who never acknowledged me, suddenly waving like we were childhood buddies. Everyone had a mask, and every mask was slipping, cracking, exposing the truth that people don't hate you when you're broke because you're broke. They hate you because it makes them feel superior, and they don't love you when you're rich because they love you. They love what they think they can take. But through that chaos, through the noise, through the apologies and fake crying and manipulative guilt tripping, there were exactly 3 people who stayed real. My business partner, my tiny team who had been with me since the early days, and my closest friend, the one person I genuinely believed would never betray me, the one who sat with me on the floor of my crappy apartment many nights eating dollar store cookies and telling me I was going to change the world. And for a while, she was the only stable thing I had as the world flipped upside down. When I returned to California, my family tried staging a full intervention in my parking lot, acting like I owed them an explanation. My mother dramatically crying on the hood of my car, my sister demanding a cut because she motivated me with tough love, aka online humiliation, my relatives saying the family needed to rebrand, now that someone successful was finally among them, and I felt this calm anger settle in my chest, like I had finally stepped outside the fog of manipulation I grew up in. I told them I didn't owe them a penny, not an explanation, not a favor, not a role in my life. And when they kept yelling, insisting, accusing, I turned around, walked inside, and blocked every single one of them within 5 minutes. Phone, socials, email, everything, which felt like ripping off a heavy coat I didn't know I had been wearing since childhood. For the first time, I felt free, or I thought I was. Because the real twist, the real betrayal, the one I never saw coming, wasn't from my mother or my sister or any relative. It was from my closest friend, the one person I trusted, the one person who knew everything, the money, the company, the struggle, the nights I cried, the nights I wanted to quit, every insecurity, every secret. It started small. Her making snide comments about how I changed, her acting annoyed that I was busy, her joking about how she deserved a percentage of the company for being emotionally supportive. But then I noticed things missing from my apartment. Information leaked that only she knew, private emails forwarded to strangers, until the truth slapped me harder than anything my family had ever done. She had been quietly feeding details about my company to a competitor in exchange for money, hiding it behind the mask of concern and friendship and just checking on you, all while pretending to care. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She didn't cry, she didn't apologize, she just shrugged and said, "You have everything now, why does it matter?" And I realized in that moment that she had never been on my side. She had just been waiting for her opportunity to take what she could. That betrayal hurt more than anything my family had ever done, because this wasn't manipulation masked as parenting. This was intentional, calculated, greedy. So I cut her off too. Not with yelling, not with drama, but with silence. Complete, final silence. I fired her from the small side role I had given her in my company, revoked her access, blocked her everywhere, and walked away from the ashes of every relationship I once held onto like oxygen. And the strange part, it didn't destroy me. It didn't even break me. It clarified me. When the dust settled, when the fake apologies dried up and the manipulators found new targets, when the noise faded and the world stopped buzzing, I realized I was alone. But for the first time, I was alone by choice, with my money, my company, my freedom, my identity finally unmasked. No more pretending. No more shrinking. No more playing broke to survive. I moved out of the tiny apartment, left California for a penthouse in New York overlooking the city lights, hired security, hired a real team, rebuilt my circle from scratch with people who didn't care about my bank account. And as I watched the skyline the first night in my new place, quiet, calm, still, I realized the final truth. I didn't lose a family or a friend. I lost illusions. I lost masks. I lost people who were never mine to begin with. And in that silence, with everything behind me and everything ahead of me, I finally exhaled, free at last, the end. My best friend betrayed me in silence, so I uncovered the truth that blew up his entire life. I always thought stability was something you built slowly, one careful decision at a time, like stacking little stones into a tower and praying none of them wobble. And for most of my 20s, it actually felt like I had managed to build something that didn't shake under my feet. My career was finally gaining momentum at the Seattle tech startup, where I worked as a marketing strategist. I had a cozy apartment with overpriced hardwood floors I pretended were vintage. I was finally in a place where I didn't feel like I was sprinting just to keep up with life. And through everything, breakups, job hunts, family drama, there was always one person I trusted without question. Ethan, my best friend since I was 14. Ethan was the kind of guy everyone described the same way. Funny, reliable, a little sarcastic, but charming enough that he got away with it. The quiet, charismatic type who made people feel special just by listening. And for years, I believed he was simply the one person in my life who would never blindside me. And maybe that's why I noticed the cracks so early, before they were big enough for anyone else to see. Because when someone has been your constant for half your life, even the smallest shift feels like an earthquake disguised as a breeze. It started with the text, little delays, small inconsistencies, moments where his answers felt too clipped, too rehearsed, like he was choosing his words instead of just talking the way he used to. I told myself I was imagining it because work had been stressful, and so what if Ethan took longer to reply? We weren't 16 anymore. We had lives. But then came the lies. Tiny ones at first, stupid ones he didn't even need to tell, saying he was at home when I later saw a tagged photo of him at a bar, claiming he forgot his charger when he clearly had his phone on all night. Little odd stories that didn't match up. None of them were big enough to confront him about, but they piled up in my mind like dust collecting in corners. You don't see it until suddenly the whole room looks different. Work started feeling strange too, and I didn't immediately connect it to him because why would I? People were suddenly less warm. Conversations quieted when I walked into rooms. Meetings that I used to lead began happening without me. And more than once a coworker I trusted avoided eye contact like they knew something I didn't. Then my presentation files began disappearing. First one deck I'd spent a weekend polishing, then a project outline I had saved twice, just in case. then an entire folder that I had opened the night before and found empty the next morning. Itty brushed it off as sync issues. My manager Dana gave me sympathetic eyebrows, but nothing else. And in the middle of all that, Ethan suddenly started acting like my own personal warning system, telling me things like, "Hey, just watch your back around Julia. She said something weird about you." Or, "Maybe don't trust Brandon too much. He's been telling people you're distracted lately." Or, "I heard someone's trying to position themselves ahead of you for the new strategy lead role." Every time he said that, he wore this pitying look, like he hated being the messenger and was doing me some huge favor by telling me what people were really saying. The funny part? I hadn't heard a single thing from anyone else. Not a hint, not a whisper, just Ethan, feeding me small doses of paranoia dressed as loyalty. And still, I didn't suspect him. Not really. I mean, why would I? This was Ethan, the guy who helped me move apartments 3 times, who held my hand the night my dad had surgery, who brought me soup when I had strep and refused to leave even when I yelled at him for making the apartment smell like chicken death. That's the thing about trust. You don't notice it disappearing until you're standing in situations where you need it and find yourself empty-handed. When whole sections of my ideas started appearing in meetings being presented by someone else, not in a similar concept way, but in a word for word, slide for slide, this is literally mine way, I felt the first real crack split open. I would pitch an idea to Ethan over late night donuts or during one of our long walks along the waterfront, and 2 weeks later I'd see a teammate presenting the exact same concept. Same hook, same phrasing, sometimes even the same color palette I used. And Ethan would sit there across from me afterwards saying, "That's crazy. Maybe it's just coincidence. People think alike," with this weird small smile that didn't match the situation. I brushed it off because I was tired, because confronting a friend you consider family feels like yanking out your own rib, because I thought maybe stress was making me overreact. But the unease grew teeth. It clawed at me. Every morning I walked into the office and felt a new, cold distance from people who used to greet me with warmth. It chewed at me every time Ethan gave another friendly warning about someone talking behind my back. It gnawed at me when I found file versions edited at times I wasn't even awake. I told myself to focus on the promotion I've been working toward for months. Strategy lead. I had built the portfolio, led the campaigns, hit every metric. It was supposed to be my turning point, and maybe that's why the day everything shifted is etched into me like someone carved it straight into my bones. I walked into Dana's office expecting the usual nerves, the butterflies, the quiet hope that maybe working myself to the edge had been worth it, but instead she gave me that corporate pity face, the one HR people swear they don't practice. She said the company was moving in a different direction. They were giving the promotion to someone else, someone who had displayed more initiative lately, someone who just happened to present ideas eerily similar to mine. I felt the air leave my lungs so violently I genuinely thought for a second I might pass out. Months of work gone. Opportunities ripped right out of my hands. I thanked her because I was too stunned to do anything else, walked out, and the first person I saw was Ethan, leaning casually against the reception desk like he'd been waiting for me. And he smiled. He actually smiled. Not a big grin, not obvious gloating, but this tiny twitch in the corner of his mouth like he was swallowing a laugh. And that was the exact second, right there in that hallway with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, that something inside me finally whispered what I had been refusing to acknowledge for weeks. Something is wrong, and he knows more than he's letting on. I didn't say anything. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or accuse or cry. I just stood there staring at my best friend, feeling something cold and sharp slip between us, like a knife slid into a space no one realized was vulnerable. Because for the first time in 12 years, Ethan wasn't the person I trusted most. He was the person I suddenly couldn't read at all. The person whose smile felt out of place. The person whose eyes didn't match the sympathy in his voice when he said, "I'm so sorry, Arya, you deserved it." And the worst part, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't sorry at all. He was satisfied, almost relieved, like something had gone exactly the way he wanted. And that was the moment the cracks stopped being cracks and became a fracture running straight through the center of my life. One I knew would only get deeper from here, even if I didn't yet understand just how deep the break truly went, or who caused it. I didn't start digging on purpose. It was more like my brain refused to let the promotion thing go, and I began noticing things I'd brushed off before, because it was easier to believe the world was chaotic than to believe someone you loved could be quietly dismantling your life from the shadows. The first crack in the surface came a few days after the promotion meeting, when I was going through my sent emails to prepare for a project update, and I saw something that made my skin prick. An email I had supposedly sent at 2:47 a.m. I wasn't awake at 2:47 a.m. I hadn't been awake at any ungodly hour in weeks, because losing that promotion was already sucking every last bit of energy out of me. When I clicked into the email, my stomach dropped. It was a response to a client with a tone I would never use. Sloppy, abrupt, borderline rude. There was no way I wrote that. I scrolled through the thread and saw edits, deletions, scheduled send times that didn't match my usual habits. I chalked it up to maybe someone accessing my laptop while I slept, a syncing glitch, anything except the thing my instincts were whispering. Someone else had touched this. But instincts are annoying. They never leave you alone once they hook into something. So the next day, I checked a shared file for a campaign I had been leading for months, only to see the last edited by label showing a name that wasn't mine, but also wasn't someone with permission to access it. I stared at that little icon for a full minute because it didn't make sense. The timestamp said 11:14 p.m. I had been at Ethan's apartment then, eating takeout and venting about losing the promotion while he nodded sympathetically, playing some stupid phone game, and telling me I was too good for that place anyway. I remember every detail because I was crying into pad thai while he sat across from me acting like it broke his heart to see me hurt. So how had someone been inside the file at the same time? And why would they even need access? That tiny inconsistency dug into me like a hook. I checked other files, more edits I didn't make, deleted lines, rearranged slides. My work being tampered with like someone was trying to make me look unprepared. I changed all my passwords that night, two-factor authentication, phone verification, the whole digital fortress. And still, a few days later, I got a login alert from a device I didn't recognize. Not once, twice, both times around moments when my work mysteriously disappeared or changed. My stomach twisted itself into painful knots. Someone was inside my accounts. Someone who knew my habits, my projects, my schedule, someone close enough to cover their tracks. And still, I didn't want to suspect Ethan. I pushed the thought away so hard it hurt. I blamed glitches. Maybe I messed up when updating security settings. Maybe someone at work had admin access. Maybe the universe just hated me. But it wasn't just a digital weirdness. It was real life whispers too. The first came from Julia when she caught me in the kitchen grabbing coffee. She avoided my eyes and muttered, "I didn't mean anything by it," before walking away. I froze. Mean anything by what? Then Brandon started being distant, giving me this weird, uncomfortable smile whenever I approached, like he knew something I didn't. That feeling, the one where you're the last person in the room to find out someone's been talking about you, settled into my chest like a stone. Eventually, I cornered a junior analyst named Marie, who always had a hard time lying. She told me, hesitating and apologizing the whole time, that there was a rumor going around that I had thrown a coworker under the bus in a client call. A call I wasn't even on. Apparently, multiple people heard I had blamed the delays on someone else's incompetence. Apparently, I had a temper lately. And apparently, this part nearly made me drop the cup in my hand. Ethan had told Marie he felt bad for me because I didn't mean it that way. Ethan, my best friend. Ethan, who wasn't even part of my company. Ethan, who should have known better than anyone that I would never do something like that. Ethan, who had somehow heard this rumor before I had. I walked away from Marie with my heart pounding so loud I could hear the thump in my ears. Something wasn't making sense. Something about Ethan's behavior. His timing, his words. Every time I felt isolated, he just happened to be there, giving me warnings and sympathy. Every time something went wrong, he was the first one to say he heard about it. Every time I doubted myself, he fed into that doubt like it was his job. The pattern was too clean, too precise, too convenient. And the worst part was that the more I replayed the last few months, the more the puzzle pieces started snapping together in ways I didn't want them to. I spent the next week quietly investigating my own life like some strange, unwilling detective. I checked email logs, phone backups, cloud histories. I found edits made at times I wasn't online. I found Slack messages I never sent but apparently came from my account. I checked versions of documents in the history tab and saw someone had reversed my changes at 3 a.m., 5 a.m., lunch breaks, moments when I was with Ethan, when he saw me put my phone down, when he borrowed my laptop just to check something real quick. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to build a case against the one person I thought would never betray me. But then I stumbled onto something that made every hair on my arm stand up. A voice memo, accidentally recorded. I must have hit the record button while my phone was in my bag at Ethan's apartment. The first half was muffled movement, bumps, background noise, and then Ethan's voice, clear as day, talking to someone on the phone. I heard him say, "She'll freak out soon. She always does. She just needs a little push." Then a pause, a laugh. Of course I did. She trusts me too much to even check. My blood froze. My fingers went numb. I replayed it 5 times, 6, 7, until the words carved themselves into me like they were being tattooed into my bones. That was the moment I stopped making excuses. That was the moment I silently declared war. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Confronting him would tip my hand, and I needed proof. Solid proof. So I played dumb. I laughed at his jokes. I ate lunch with him. I let him think everything was normal while inside me a wildfire was building. I turned into a quiet observer of my own life, documenting everything with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. Screenshots, backup logs, device access history. I screenshotted messages from coworkers repeating things Ethan had said. I recorded conversations. I compiled timestamps. I even messaged his ex-girlfriend under the guise of checking in, and she told me something that chilled me. Ethan had always compared himself to me. Always. She said he used to say things like, Arya gets everything handed to her, and I work twice as hard for half the recognition she gets. She told me he hated how teachers loved me in high school, how professors encouraged me in college, how easily I made friends, how quickly I excelled at work. She told me he once admitted he felt overshadowed since we were kids. And when she said that word, overshadowed, it clicked. Everything. Every weird moment, every warning, every sabotage, every rumor. Ethan wasn't supporting me. He was studying me, tracking me, undermining me in ways subtle enough to avoid suspicion but powerful enough to ruin me. He wasn't my best friend. He was a quiet, patient saboteur who had been planting landmines in my life for months, maybe years, waiting for me to step on them. When I realized the one person I trusted most had built his identity around resenting me, I felt something inside me harden. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity. A kind of cold, sharp clarity that told me the story I thought I was living wasn't the truth at all. And as I stared at all the evidence scattered across my laptop, every file tampered with, every login, every rumor traced back to him, I understood one thing with brutal certainty. Ethan's betrayal wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't even recent. This was something that had been simmering inside him since high school, a jealousy so deep and so carefully hidden that I never saw it until it was already tearing my life apart. And I knew, without any doubt, that the only way to survive this was to expose him, piece by piece, the same way he had dismantled me in silence. I spent the next week living inside my own memories like I was walking through a haunted house built from moments I once thought were harmless. And the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that Ethan's betrayal wasn't something new. It was a slow-burning storm that had been gathering behind me for years, maybe even since childhood, and I had been too trusting, too loyal, too blinded by nostalgia to see the warning signs simmering beneath every smile he gave me. It started when I pulled up an old high school group chat, one I hadn't touched in forever, and scrolled through old messages just to see if anything felt off in hindsight. I didn't expect to find anything. I was doing it more like an emotional autopsy than an investigation. But the further I scrolled, the stranger it felt reading the tone of Ethan's messages. Little jabs disguised as jokes, comments about how teachers favored me, how I always got picked first, how everyone just listens to Arya because she acts like she knows everything. At the time, I had laughed it off like everyone else did. I thought he was being sarcastic, teasing me the way friends tease. But now it read like resentment, trapped under layers of fake humor. I scrolled to college-era texts, more comments. He'd say things like, "Of course Arya already finished the assignment," or "Don't ask me, ask perfect Arya," or "She's probably too busy being adored by professors." I remembered shrugging those off too. I remembered thinking he was insecure or stressed, not hateful. But suddenly, every memory felt like a clue I had ignored because I believed loyalty meant overlooking flaws. Then came the part that made my stomach tighten. Old emails. Not mine. His. I had access because years ago we shared a backup drive during a group project and he never removed some folders. I clicked through old drafts he must have forgotten were even stored there. Some were emails he never sent. Some were fragments of venting. One was a long, angry rant written during senior year of high school where he complained about how I always got everything without even trying, how people fell over themselves to help Arya, how I stole opportunities because I could smile and pretend everything was easy. My chest tightened as I scrolled through line after line of bitterness I never knew existed. There were mentions of my scholarships, my internships, my friendships, all things I worked hard for, all things he apparently resented. But the darkest line was the last one. "I don't know why she bothers pretending we're equals." The words made my hands shake. I had never, not once, treated him like he was less than me. Not once had I thought of myself as better. We had grown up side by side, and I always believed we were on the same team. That was the first moment I realized Ethan had rewritten our entire friendship inside his head. In his version of the story, I wasn't his friend. I was his rival, his shadow, the obstacle he could never outrun. And once that clicked, everything else started slotting into place like a horrifying puzzle. I called his ex-girlfriend, Jenna, hoping maybe she could help me understand the timeline of when his resentment began boiling over. She answered reluctantly. No one wanted to get pulled back into Ethan's mess, but when I told her what I'd found, she let out a slow, exhausted sigh like she wasn't surprised at all. She told me things I wasn't prepared for. During their sophomore year of college, he had started reading her emails when she left her laptop unattended. At first it was jealousy, but then it morphed into something controlling. She said she once caught him deleting a message from an internship coordinator because she didn't need more opportunities. She thought it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. He had a pattern, a need to control narratives, a need to feel seen at someone else's expense. And when they broke up, he told her that Arya's probably going to abandon me next too, like I belonged to him, like my success or my independence was some kind of personal insult. I hung up feeling sick, but the worst discovery came 3 days later when someone I barely knew, an old classmate named Lauren, messaged me out of nowhere. She said she heard I'd been asking questions about Ethan and thought she should tell me something she'd kept to herself for years. She told me that in junior year of college, Ethan had intercepted an email she sent me about a group project because he didn't want me partnering with her. He responded, pretending to be me, saying I wasn't interested. I never knew. She said she found out only after he did something similar to another girl in their department, isolating her from her lab partner just because he wanted to work with him instead. And when she confronted him, he told her she was overreacting and Arya wouldn't care anyway. I sat there rereading her messages until the words blurred. My entire sense of reality felt like it was unraveling. This wasn't resentment that grew recently. This was a pattern of manipulation going back almost a decade. He had quietly pulled strings, nudged people, intercepted opportunities, twisted narratives, not out of anger, but out of a deep, festering jealousy that he had fed daily like it was the only way he could function. The final blow was when I dug into the promotion Ethan had acted so supportive about. I didn't even know he applied for it until I found his name embedded in an internal candidate list. He hadn't told me, not once, not even after I spent months working for it, sacrificing sleep, pouring every bit of myself into that project. And suddenly, the sabotage made sense. The deleted slides, the missing data, the edits I never made, the rumors, the warnings. He wasn't protecting me. He was eliminating his competition, me, his supposed best friend. And to make it worse, he submitted a proposal for that promotion that used ideas I had mentioned only to him. Ideas I had never written down anywhere. Ideas he could only know because he pretended to listen and help while secretly stealing every concept he could. It took everything in me not to break down right there. I felt like I had been living in a house that looked beautiful on the outside, only to realize the foundation was rotting. The walls were infested, and the person living with me was the one letting termites in every night. And still, I didn't confront him, not yet, because now that I knew this was bigger than recent sabotage, I understood that exposing him had to be orchestrated with precision. I needed the right moment, a moment where the truth wouldn't just come out, it would detonate. So I spent the next few days gathering everything: old messages from his ex, statements from coworkers, email metadata, file history, access logs, voice recordings, even screenshots from people who admitted they had heard him say things about me that didn't match the person he pretended to be around me. And all the while, I smiled at him, laughed at his jokes, acted clueless while he tightened the noose around the career he thought he was destroying. Which is why it didn't faze me. Well, not visibly, when he set up what he clearly believed would be the final, spectacular sabotage. I overheard him on the phone at his apartment one night, saying something about a mistake Arya made that would blow up at the team meeting. His voice was low, calculated, smug. He thought the trap was perfect. He thought I would walk straight into it. He thought he'd finally get rid of me professionally once and for all. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that I already knew every detail of his plan, every step he'd taken, every lie he'd whispered behind my back. And I was ready, not just to defend myself, but to end the story he'd been writing without my permission for years. I swear I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth the morning everything came to a head, because walking into that glass-walled conference room felt like walking into a battleground I'd spent months preparing for. A place where I was ready not just to defend myself, but to burn down every lie Ethan had layered around my life, like a suffocating fog. And as I sat there with my laptop in front of me, pretending to review my notes while internally rehearsing the speech I'd deliver if things went exactly as I expected, I kept replaying every shred of proof I'd gathered. The login history he didn't know I tracked, the emails I recovered from backups, the audio he didn't know he triggered on my phone, the witness statements from people he tried to intimidate, the timelines I stitched together like a forensic scientist reconstructing a crime scene, and even the messages he accidentally sent to the wrong person that made my stomach drop at the time but now felt like weapons I was fully ready to use. I sat there knowing I wasn't the weak one anymore, knowing that for the first time since the sabotage began, I had the upper hand, and all I had to do was wait for Ethan to make his move, because he always did. Always slipped into that smug, self-appointed genius mode where he believed he could outtalk, outsmart, and outmaneuver everyone, including me. And like clockwork, he walked into the meeting dressed in his carefully rehearsed confidence. That same fake, charming swagger he used to win people over, waving hello to the partners at the far end of the table as if he belonged at the center of the room. And even though my stomach twisted, my face stayed calm because I knew the script he thought he was running. This was the meeting he had been prepping for weeks in secret. The one where he would finally step on my neck publicly and claim my new project as his own. The one he thought would secure his promotion and erase me from any meaningful conversations at the company. And the wild part was when he sat down next to me and whispered, "Don't be nervous, I've got you." I felt an actual wave of disgust crawl up my spine because he still thought he was untouchable, still believed I was blind, still believed he was winning, still believed all the pieces were falling exactly in place for him, and I wanted to laugh because he had no idea I was about to detonate his entire life in front of everyone he spent years trying to impress. When leadership called the meeting to order and the CEO asked, "Ethan, you'll be starting us off with the project review, correct?" Ethan nodded like it was his coronation day, pulled up a slide deck he had stitched together using my stolen work. My research, my projections, my UI mockups, my strategy notes he copied word for word. And for several minutes, he confidently walked the room through my ideas as if he'd spent months crafting them, even occasionally pausing to fake humble himself like, "Of course this is something Arya and I discussed, but I took the initiative to push it forward." And I watched the room buying it, nodding, taking notes, impressed, hanging on his words, and I felt my chest tighten. Not because I believed him, but because this was the last moment he would ever get away with lying about me, and with perfect timing, just before he clicked to the final slide, the CEO asked, "Arya, do you want to add anything before we move into numbers?" And Ethan didn't look at me, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the little twitch he always got when he assumed I'd stay quiet and obedient and let him bask in fake glory. But this wasn't the Arya he bullied in silence anymore. I stood, plugged in my own laptop, and said in the steadiest voice I think I've ever used in my life, "Yes, I have a few things to clarify." And instantly, the energy in the room shifted, because while everyone expected Ethan to dominate the space, they didn't expect me to interrupt his performance. And as the projector switched from his laptop to mine, I clicked open a folder labeled Truth, and the silence was so sharp it felt like it sliced through the air. "Everything you've seen," I began, "was built on sabotage." And Ethan whipped his head toward me so fast I heard his breath catch, his face draining of color, because in that moment he finally understood I wasn't confused, scared, or oblivious. I was ready. I started with timestamps, edits made from Ethan's IP address. At times I was logged out, files accessed from his MacBook through remote login while he swore he was out grabbing food, and I watched the leadership team lean forward in confusion. Then I went into the email discrepancies, showing side-by-side screenshots of messages I never sent, but that came from my account, forwarded by Ethan to other departments to make me look incompetent or irresponsible. And I heard someone at the far end whisper, "Oh my God." I pulled up logs from the company server showing unauthorized access to my folders from an employee ID that matched Ethan's login credentials. I added in the Slack messages he sent pretending to be concerned about my slipping performance. Messages he later showed me in fake sympathy, saying he tried to defend me, but people were starting to question my reliability. And I saw the CTO rub her temples like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Ethan began stuttering, trying to interrupt, but the CEO held up a hand and said sharply, "Let her finish." And I swear that was the moment Ethan realized he wasn't just losing control, he was free-falling with no safety net. I kept going, unveiling voice memos accidentally recorded when Ethan sat too close to my phone during meetings and whispered nasty predictions about my career, recordings he had no idea existed until now. I played one, just 5 seconds long, where he said to someone, "She's too naive to see she's handing me her promotion," and hearing his voice echo through the glass conference room made him physically flinch. Then came witness statements. Coworkers who admitted Ethan reached out to them privately, warning them that I was unstable or burnt out, manipulating them into giving him opportunities that were supposed to be mine. Then the recovered text from his ex-girlfriend who finally cracked open the truth and told me Ethan had a long history of jealous destruction, especially toward women who succeeded where he didn't. Every piece hit like another crack in the foundation beneath his crafted persona. And by the time I displayed the final timeline, color-coded, sourced, and linked, showing exactly how Ethan had sabotaged my promotion to apply for it himself, the room was dead silent, except for the sound of Ethan's shallow breathing. And then, because fate has a dramatic sense of timing, HR spoke up first. "Ethan, we need your badge and laptop now." His mouth fell open and he tried to stand, tried to defend himself, tried to spin a story, but no one listened, not when they had evidence stacked taller than his ego. And 2 security officers appeared at the door like they'd been waiting for the signal. He looked at me with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief, as if I had done something terrible to him and I couldn't help it. I felt nothing for him anymore, not even anger, just a strange, clean emptiness. The fallout happened fast. He was escorted out of the building, and within 2 hours, HR sent a company-wide notice that he had violated multiple policies and was terminated effective immediately. By the end of the week, he was blacklisted in the industry because word travels fast, especially when the CEO personally calls partner companies. Over the next few days, I heard through mutual friends that his girlfriend dumped him after seeing the evidence I released publicly in a neatly organized folder, because the world deserved to know the truth after how long he twisted it. His family, the ones who always believed he was some misunderstood genius, stopped defending him when they discovered from others that Ethan had lied to them for years, painting himself as my loyal best friend while quietly destroying me behind my back. He ended up crashing on someone's couch after losing his apartment because he couldn't afford rent without his job, and even his closest friends distanced themselves because no one wants to stand next to someone whose entire life is built on manipulation. Meanwhile, I didn't celebrate. Instead, I walked into HR the next day and reclaimed not just my reputation, but my narrative, explaining clearly everything I had gone through, and the company listened, finally listened, and reinstated my role in the project while fast tracking on a recovery plan for everything Ethan had derailed. But the biggest change wasn't the professional vindication. It was the shift inside me. The moment I walked out of the building into the crisp afternoon air and realized I wasn't just free of Ethan, I was free of the part of myself that tolerated his control, free of the fear he planted in me, free of the belief that loyalty meant accepting betrayal in silence. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt my life in small, meaningful ways, forming new friendships at work with people who genuinely respected me, setting boundaries for the first time without apologizing, reconnecting with parts of myself I had lost, while trying to keep peace with someone who never deserved the effort in the first place. And somewhere in all that healing, I realized my future wasn't something to survive anymore. It was something I finally got to shape, unshadowed, unmanipulated, unafraid. Ethan's downfall wasn't my victory. My rebirth was. The end. My family treated me like a backup plan until I became the only one they needed. I grew up in a house where love wasn't something you earned. It was something my older brother Brandon collected like it was his birthright. And I was just the kid standing in his shadow, holding scraps he didn't bother to keep. Which is kind of funny in a dark way because I spent most of my childhood trying to be invisible enough to avoid the arguments, but present enough to earn just a little bit of the affection my parents treated like exclusive merchandise branded with his name. From as early as I can remember, Brandon was the sun, and we were all expected to orbit him. My parents shining with pride every time he breathed, bragging about his natural talent, his bright future, his leadership qualities, while I sat in the corner building Lego sets by myself, unnoticed unless they needed someone to blame when Brandon messed up. Like the time he shattered mom's expensive vase throwing a football in the living room, and I was the one lectured and grounded because I should have stopped him, even though I was 10 and he was 15, towering over me, calling me Little Dane the Doormat, a nickname so accurate for how the family used me that it stuck in my own head for years. I remember birthdays where Brandon got brand new sneakers, expensive gadgets, and a cake big enough to feed a small village, while I got a card with a $20 bill and a rushed, "Sorry, we've been busy," or worse, the year they literally forgot it was my birthday until I came downstairs and saw no decorations, no anything. And mom gasped, slapped her forehead and said, "Dane, why didn't you remind us?" Like it was my job to schedule my own celebration. And Brandon just laughed and said, "Dude, no one cares about birthdays after 12. Even though he was turning 17 that year and they had booked him a party at a sports bar. The truth is, everything in our house revolved around how things looked from the outside. My parents were obsessed with image, with being the family everyone admired, the family with the prodigy athlete son and the supportive parents who attended every game and posted every accomplishment on Facebook. And I was the background character they kept around to make the family photo look fuller, the backup plan they never chose but still expected to be perfect, quiet, obedient, unproblematic, and grateful for even a sliver of their attention. So I tried so damn hard. Getting good grades, staying out of trouble, doing the chores no one asked Brandon to do, being polite, working twice as hard for half the recognition, but no matter how well I performed, every conversation turned into some version of, "Why can't you be more like Brandon?" And after hearing that enough times, you stop asking what's wrong with them and start wondering what's wrong with you. By the time I hit middle school, I had learned that if something went wrong, anything from a broken lamp to Brandon getting caught cheating on a test, my name was the first thrown under the bus. And if I ever protested, mom would sigh and dad would shake his head and tell me I was being dramatic or sensitive or too easily offended, which is hilarious because they were the most emotionally fragile people I've ever met, shattering at any criticism, even mild, but sharpening into steel when it came to defending Brandon. The ecosystem they built around him so airtight that even reality couldn't break through. High school made everything worse because that's when Brandon really leaned into the golden child role. Star quarterback, king of the friend group, girls lining up to date him, teachers bending rules for him, and my parents basked in it like his trophies were their personal heaven, dragging me to every game and forcing me to cheer, even when I wanted to stay home and study for my own exams, which never mattered to them anyway. I'll never forget the night I won first place in a state science competition and came home clutching the medal like it was proof that I mattered, only to find my parents screaming at Brandon for getting a C in history, and when I tried to show them the medal, mom brushed me off with, "Not now, Dane, can't you see your brother is upset?" And that was the moment I felt something crack inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a tiny, quiet fracture that started growing each time they chose him over me, which was every single day. Eventually, the cracks turned into a canyon, and by the time I was 16, I had mentally checked out of the family entirely, focusing on work, school, saving money, anything that gave me control over my life because the house sure didn't. And I became the kid who learned to survive by doing everything himself. Cooking, working part-time jobs, managing my own homework, while Brandon was chauffeured around like royalty. And the whole time my parents acted like this imbalance was normal, natural, deserved. The final straw came at 18, senior year, when Brandon totaled the car dad had bought him for his birthday and blamed me. saying I distracted him with a text, even though I never texted him once that day. But my parents didn't care. They yelled, grounded me for a car I didn't even drive, and told me I needed to be more responsible. And at that moment, something inside me finally snapped in a way that couldn't be undone. A quiet, icy certainty that I wasn't staying in that house another day, so I packed a bag that night while they slept, walked out with $480 in my bank account, and moved into a tiny studio apartment in a rough neighborhood where the walls were thin and the heating barely worked. But for the first time in my life, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. I worked 2 jobs, one at a hardware store, one doing late night computer repairs, while attending community college on the side, eating microwave noodles, sleeping on a thrift store mattress, and learning how to exist without being someone's punching bag. And slowly, inch by inch, I built myself back up, discovering skills I never knew I had, fixing computers, designing websites, taking freelance tech gigs until the money trickled in more consistently. And with every dollar I earned honestly, with no guilt trips attached, I felt a version of myself forming that no longer needed their approval. I didn't talk to my family much in those first few years, not because I hated them, but because every conversation felt like reopening an old wound, and the distance gave me strength I didn't know I was missing, letting me grow into a man who didn't flinch at conflict and didn't need validation from people who never gave it freely. By 22, I had enough saved to lease a better apartment and start a small tech support business. And by 24, I was contracting with local companies, fixing their networks, building their systems, and making more money in a month than my dad made in 3. Not that he ever asked, not that they ever wondered how I was doing, because in their minds, I had always been the background character who existed to support their star. And the funniest part is that in the process of trying to make me invisible, they taught me how to survive without them, how to build a life brick by brick with my own 2 hands. And by the time I turned 27, fully stable, calm, independent, and living in a peaceful neighborhood in a small but beautifully arranged apartment that actually felt like home, I realized the irony of everything. The family that spent my entire life treating me like a backup plan had no idea that the backup plan had already left, grown, and succeeded without them, and that the day was coming when they would need me more than they'd ever admit. Turning 27 felt strangely calm, like waking up one morning and realizing the storms you spent your entire childhood navigating had finally run out of clouds, and the sky above you, quiet, open, stable, was something you built for yourself piece by piece, without applause, without handouts, without anyone acknowledging how heavy the journey was. But maybe that's what made it mean more. My life had settled into this comfortable rhythm that no one from my old world would ever understand. A world where peace wasn't just a luxury. It was proof that I'd survived something they didn't even see as trauma. And every day I woke up in my apartment, a small but beautifully organized space in a middle-class neighborhood with big sycamore trees lining the streets. I felt this sense of ownership over my life that I had never felt in the house I grew up in, the one filled with trophies that weren't mine and expectations I never agreed to. My tech support business had become something real, something respectable, something stable enough that I didn't wake up fearing the next bill or wondering if a slow month would ruin me. I had a rotating set of clients, small offices, local shops, 2 real estate firms, and a couple of startups who loved that I was reliable, on time, and didn't upsell nonsense like other tech companies did. I offered what I said I'd offer, charged what I promised, and didn't bullshit anyone, which somehow made me the anomaly in a field full of people selling magic instead of work. My days started early, usually around 6, with black coffee, a quiet 30 minutes on my balcony watching the neighborhood slowly come alive. And then I'd head inside and run through emails, invoices, updates, scheduling repairs or meetings, and planning out which part of town I'd hit first. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And after growing up in a place where nothing belonged to me, not attention, not affection, not even a sense of identity, having something that was entirely my creation felt like a victory no one could ever take away. My social circle wasn't big, but it was real. 2 close friends from community college, Leo and Harper, who had stuck with me through the grind years and somehow became my chosen family in a way blood never managed to be. We had weekly dinners, random hangouts, game nights that lasted until 2 a.m. And they loved me without the strange conditions my parents always tried to attach to affection. They listened when I talked, laughed at my humor in a way that wasn't dismissive, checked on me without expecting something in return. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be around people who didn't see me as backup, support, or filler. They saw me, Dane, just as I was. My routines were simple but meaningful. Morning coffee, gym 3 times a week, client visits, working on my business after hours, meal prepping on Sundays, reading at night with soft lamplight and a playlist of old instrumental tracks. It was quiet, steady, predictable, the opposite of the chaos I grew up in, and that contrast made the peace even sweeter. I hadn't spoken to my family much in years, not because I wanted to punish them, but because every time they reached out, it was transactional. If mom texted, she needed something, and if dad called, he needed a favor. And if Brandon messaged me, he definitely needed something. usually money or help getting out of trouble. So I learned early on that silence kept my sanity intact. They never asked how I was doing, never asked about my business, never asked if I was happy, and I stopped expecting them to. Some relationships become healthier when you shrink them down to nothing. Every holiday passed without guilt because the people I surrounded myself with now actually wanted me in their lives, something I could never say about the house I grew up in. And every birthday I celebrated with my friends felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me as a kid. I thought I had put it all behind me. Every bruise of a childhood memory, every neglected milestone, every unfair comparison, every time I had been made to feel like a spare tire nobody wanted, but everyone expected to rely on if the golden child's wheels ever fell off. I built my life on the opposite principle: stability without noise, success without applause, independence without resentment. And for a while, it worked. For a while, I believed I'd finally outrun them. Until the afternoon, my phone rang on a Wednesday in late September, an unremarkable day where I was sorting through receipts and scheduling a network upgrade for one of my clients when I saw the name flash across the screen. Mom. My entire body froze, not dramatically, but in the subtle, familiar way someone reacts to touching an old scar they forgot was still sensitive. She never called unless something was wrong, and I stared at the phone long enough for it to almost go to voicemail before I finally picked up. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, neutral, distant enough that she'd know I wasn't dropping everything to make her comfortable. There was a long pause on her end, a shaky breath, the kind she used to take before announcing some disaster, except this one sounded heavier, almost frightened. "Dane, honey," she started, using a nickname she only pulled out when she needed something. We need to talk about Brandon." And the moment she said his name, every old wound in my body woke up like they'd been waiting for this exact phrase, this exact tone, this exact storm to return. I felt 10 again, then 15, then 18, blamed, forgotten, overlooked, and suddenly dragged back into a dynamic I'd spent nearly a decade untangling myself from. Something was wrong, really wrong, and even though I said nothing yet, even though my apartment was quiet, my business stable, my life peaceful, I could feel the ground beneath that peace shift, the first tremor of an earthquake I didn't ask for, didn't want, and definitely didn't plan to fix. "What happened?" I asked finally, though part of me didn't want to know. Mom inhaled sharply, her voice cracking on the exhale in a way that didn't sound rehearsed this time. "It's bad, Dane. It's really bad." And just like that, the calm life I'd built with my own blood and grit felt the cold shadow of my past stretching toward it, threatening to pull me right back into the role I never chose, but they always expected. The backup plan, the fixer, the stable one, the one who shows up when their golden child crashes. Except this time, I wasn't a kid anymore, and they had no idea who they were calling. When Mom finally explained what happened to Brandon, her voice breaking in ways I'd never heard, not even during the loudest, ugliest fights of my childhood. I felt this strange mix of deja vu and emotional distance, like I was standing outside an old house watching it burn, while knowing damn well the people inside once locked me out in the rain. She started with the words she never imagined she'd say: "Brandon is in rehab." And it hit with this odd softness, not because I felt comfort or concern, but because it was surreal hearing my mother, the queen of denial, admit her golden child wasn't golden anymore. And as she rushed through details between shaky breaths, I pieced together how bad things had gotten, how Brandon's perfect life had cracked open months ago, while no one noticed, or maybe they noticed but refused to see it until it exploded. Apparently, it started with painkillers after a sports injury, something minor, a pulled shoulder from showing off at a weekend football game. And then the prescription stopped, but his need didn't. So he moved to pills he bought under the table, which spiraled into stronger stuff. And then he mixed in drinking, then gambling, then more drinking. The gambling itself was its own disaster, because Brandon wasn't just losing a couple $100s on casual bets like half the guys our age. He was spending thousands he didn't have, taking out small loans that turned into bigger loans, lying to his girlfriend, lying to his job, lying to himself, and when gambling losses collided with addiction, everything else around him began collapsing. Mom told me he got pulled into a fraud investigation at work because someone discovered creative accounting on company expense reports with his name stamped all over them. And while Brandon swore he didn't intentionally commit fraud, his supervisor wasn't buying it. So now HR was involved, upper management was involved, attorneys were circling, and the company suspended him pending a full investigation. As if that wasn't enough, his girlfriend, who had once posted constantly about how lucky she was to have him, finally packed her bags after finding messages from loan sharks threatening him in graphic detail, plus a stack of final notices hidden under their bed, which explained why Brandon's apartment manager slapped an eviction notice on his door the same week he checked into rehab. The way Mom described it, the last month of his life was basically a freefall. Creditors calling nonstop, landlords screaming, ex-girlfriend crying and moving out, his boss demanding explanations, his finances shredded, his reputation trashed, and his addiction pushing him toward darker corners he never imagined himself in. And the part that stuck with me most wasn't the chaos or the consequences or the fact that my parents were somehow shocked that a lifetime of coddling him resulted in a grown man with the emotional stability of wet paper. It was the sound in Mom's voice, that unmistakable mixture of panic, shame, and desperate justification, like she was trying to convince herself more than me that this wasn't their fault, that Brandon was still the good one, the talented one, the misunderstood one, and that all this was just an unfortunate chapter instead of a tidal wave built by years of entitlement and zero accountability. Dad got on the phone next, his tone clipped and shaky, pretending to be calm but failing miserably, and he launched into this speech about how family helps each other in times like these, and Brandon needs support right now, and you're in a good place, Dane, you could help stabilize things, which was their polite way of saying Brandon destroyed his life, so now we expect you to fix it. And the thing that stunned me wasn't the request itself, because honestly, I always knew if their golden child ever imploded, they'd run straight to me. It was how confidently they assumed I'd slide right back into the role they carved for me, the reliable spare tire they never appreciated until their prize wheel flew off. They tried everything: guilt, nostalgia, half-baked apologies, emotional manipulation wrapped in sentimental phrases like, "You're still our son," and "We know we weren't perfect parents," and "Your brother always admired you. He just struggled to show it." Lines so conveniently timed that I could practically smell the desperation over the phone. They even played the memory card, digging up moments from childhood they never cared about when they happened, trying to rewrite history as though our family had ever been the warm, united front they wanted me to help them pretend to be now. And what surprised me most was the fact that I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. It was like two versions of me were fighting inside my chest. The younger version, still bruised from years of being overshadowed and blamed, wanting to tell them to clean up their own mess for once. And the grown version, the calm, independent 27-year-old who had rebuilt himself with no help from anyone, feeling the strange pull of obligation mixed with morbid curiosity. Eventually, Mom, still sobbing, asked if I could come over to talk in person. "Just talk, Dane, please." And something in me hesitated long enough that I knew the answer before I said it. I agreed, not because I owed them anything, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed to witness the empire they built around Brandon finally cracking. When I drove to my parents' house for the first time in years, the neighborhood looked the same. Same manicured lawns, same neighbors pretending perfection, same houses echoing the same secrets. But I wasn't the same. And as I pulled into the driveway of the place I once escaped, I felt a strange mix of dread and power in my chest. Walking up to the front door felt like walking back into a battlefield that no longer scared me. The ghost still there, but smaller, quieter, almost embarrassed to face me. When the door opened, Mom looked older. Shoulders hunched under stress, eyes puffy like she hadn't slept in days. And Dad looked tired in a way I'd never seen. His confidence cracked, his posture deflated, his voice strained as he greeted me. The house smelled the same, lemon cleaner and something nostalgic I couldn't quite name. But something was different too. Something brittle in the air, like all the arrogance and superiority that once filled the space had evaporated. They guided me inside like I was a guest instead of the afterthought son they'd pushed aside for years, and the moment I stepped into the living room, I saw the evidence of their unraveling. Papers scattered on the table, letters from creditors, documents about Brandon's investigation, a rehab pamphlet, and Mom clutching her phone like she expected bad news any second. They tried to ease into the conversation at first, tried to ask about my life like they suddenly cared, but it felt forced, like they were performing concern in hopes I'd be softened enough to rescue the golden child, and watching them struggle to balance shame with expectation was surreal. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way I used to be, but I felt this deep, steady bitterness that had aged into something sharper than anger, something cooler, something deliberate. Sitting on that couch in the same spot where I'd once been lectured, blamed, dismissed, and ignored, I saw everything differently. Not through the eyes of the kid who desperately wanted their approval, but through the eyes of a man who had built a life without needing any of them. Dad kept pacing, talking in circles about Brandon's potential, his mistakes, his crisis, trying to twist the narrative into something sympathetic, something preventable, something that wasn't their fault, while Mom wiped her eyes and whispered things like, "We should have noticed sooner," and "He's still our baby," and "We can't lose him." And every sentence was another revelation of how deep their denial had run all these years. They finally got to the point. They needed money, emotional support, logistics, help dealing with legal threats, someone to talk to creditors, someone to manage rehab communication, someone level-headed enough to steady the ship, and of course, they meant me. I listened, not agreeing, not refusing, just absorbing the absurdity of it all, feeling the shift happening inside me as the power dynamics of our entire family rewrote themselves in real time. For the first time in my life, they needed me more than I needed them, and they knew it, even if they didn't say it out loud. Walking through that house, Memories hit me like quiet landmines. Moments of being ignored while Brandon was praised, moments of being blamed while Brandon was protected, moments of being punished while Brandon was excused. And instead of hurting, they felt like evidence now. Evidence of why I had every right to stand up straighter, speak slower, and take my time deciding anything. The house hadn't changed, but I had. The kid who left at 18 was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly what he was worth, and exactly what his family was not. When I left that night, after hours of tense conversation, emotional manipulation, and thinly veiled pleas for rescue, Mom grabbed my arm gently and whispered, "You're the only one who can help us, Dane. We need you." And those words, those exact words, were the most honest thing she'd said in my entire life. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, hearing the door close behind me, I realized something I never expected. When the golden child falls, the entire family falls with him. And the one they treated like a backup plan becomes the only lifeline they have left. I walked into my parents' house like I wasn't sure whether I was stepping into a memory or a battlefield, and maybe it was both, because the moment I saw them standing there, my mom wringing her hands, my dad's jaw locked so tight he looked carved from stone, Brandon slumped on the couch like he was afraid to lift his head, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger exactly, not fear either, but this strange mix of clarity and exhaustion, like I had finally reached the point where the truth could no longer stay buried under the years of "let's not talk about that" and "it's in the past." And when my mom rushed toward me with that trembling, "Oh, Dane, thank God you came," I didn't hug her back, didn't step forward. I just stood there and said, "We're not doing that." And her face fell in a way that told me she still expected the old me, the kid who'd swallow his hurt and bend first. And for the first time in my life, I let the silence belong to me. I let it stretch as I looked around the room. The same framed school photos of Brandon, the same graduation picture he'd bragged about for years, none of me anywhere. And I said, if we're doing this, we're doing it honestly. And my father, who had always been the king of emotional shutdown, opened his mouth to scold me, but something in my eyes must have stopped him, because he closed it again like he realized he didn't have that power anymore. And I walked right past them and sat down across from Brandon, who looked up like a kicked dog and whispered, "I'm sorry, man." But I wasn't ready to accept that yet. Not when it was coming from the ashes of his own collapse rather than any real understanding of what he'd done. And I told him, you don't get to skip the truth and jump straight to sorry. And for once, he didn't argue, didn't deflect, didn't throw out some manipulative line he'd learned growing up as the golden child who could do no wrong. And then I turned to my parents and said the words I'd waited years to say. You treated me like a backup plan. And now that your main plan has failed, suddenly I'm the only one who can fix things? No, not this time. My mom immediately started crying. Loud, dramatic, the kind of crying meant to redirect attention. And my dad muttered, "Dane, don't start acting like we never cared about you." And I laughed, actually laughed, because the absurdity of hearing that from him was too much after everything he'd done. And I said, "Name one time. One. Just one time you made me feel like I mattered as much as Brandon." And he froze, completely still, because he didn't have a single example. And I kept going, because once the dam finally breaks inside you, the flood is unstoppable. Do you remember grounding me for ruining Brandon's birthday when it was actually him who took my bike without asking? Do you remember calling me jealous when I asked why you only showed up for his games and never mine? Do you remember the night you forgot my 16th birthday because you were busy helping him study for a test he refused to study for until the last minute? Do you remember telling me I should be more like him? Do you remember telling me that helping Brandon was more important than chasing my own little dreams? Do you remember telling me you expected me to be responsible for him when you couldn't be bothered? My mother whispered my name like a plea, like she wanted me to soften, but I didn't. Not because I hated her, but because the truth needed space after being suffocated for so long. And I said, I left at 18 because I knew staying here would kill me inside. I built my life because you made it clear I wasn't welcome unless I was filling the gaps you didn't want to deal with. And my mom finally looked away, her shoulders shaking, and my dad stared at the floor like maybe he was seeing every mistake laid out at once. And then Brandon spoke, his voice weak but clear. They didn't protect me either, Dane. They enabled me until I turned into this, and I want to be mad at them, but most of this mess is on me. And hearing him admit that, really admit it, did something to me. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. Because for the first time in our entire lives, he wasn't performing, he wasn't playing the victim, he wasn't expecting anyone to bail him out. He was just honest, and he said, I was awful to you. I know that. I knew they favored me, and instead of ever standing up for you, I used it. I liked being the favorite. I liked getting away with everything, and I'm sorry not because I want help. I'm sorry because I finally get it. And I stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide what to do with the apology I waited more than a decade to hear. And finally I said, I won't fix your life for you, but I'm not rooting for you to fail either. And he nodded like he understood, really understood. And then I turned back to my parents, who looked terrified, not of losing me, but of losing their image of themselves as good parents. And I said, here's what's going to happen. I am not your emergency solution. I am not your replacement golden child. I am not your financial safety net, your emotional sponge, or the person you turn to only when you're desperate. If I help at all, it'll be because I choose to, not because you expect it. So from now on, you respect my boundaries, you respect my life, and you stop acting like love is conditional based on usefulness. And my dad swallowed hard, finally breaking enough to whisper, "We failed you, didn't we?" And hearing him admit that, this man who always had an excuse, always had a justification, hit me harder than I expected because it was the first crack of truth he'd ever shown. And I said, "Yes, you did, but you don't have to keep failing." And something in the room shifted, something subtle but real, like the whole dynamic of our family rewired itself in that moment. And my mom reached out, hesitant, not demanding, and said, "Can we try to be better? Not because we want something, but because we should have been all along." And I didn't take her hand, not yet, but I nodded because I wasn't here for revenge or triumph. I was here for closure, for honesty, for the chance to rewrite the ending of a story that had started badly. And after hours of talking, not arguing, not performing, actually talking, we reached something that felt close to truth. And when I finally stood to leave, Brandon looked up and said, "If I get better, maybe we can be brothers for real someday." And I said, "Maybe, but this time you'll have to meet me halfway." And he nodded, tears running down his face. And when I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not revenge, but peace. The kind of peace that only comes from choosing yourself, from rewriting your place in a family that once wrote you off. And as I got into my car, I didn't feel like the backup plan anymore. For the first time, I felt like the author of my own story, deciding who belonged in my life and on what terms. And it felt like freedom. Real freedom. The kind you don't need anyone's permission to claim. The end. I found out. My partner was living a double life, so I exposed every lie in one night. I always thought you could feel it the moment a relationship started to slip, like the air changes texture or the light in the room doesn't fall the same way. But with Liam, it didn't happen like a sudden shift in weather. It was more like discovering hairline fractures along a perfect piece of glass only after holding it up to the sun, realizing those cracks had been there for a long time, invisible until you finally stared long enough to see them. And that's exactly how everything started unraveling for me, in the quiet, ordinary moments of our life in Seattle that used to feel so warm and safe, before suspicion slipped in like a cold draft under a locked door. Starting the night he texted me, "Working late, don't wait up," even though it was only 6:45 p.m., a time that used to mean we were chopping vegetables together and arguing about whether cilantro tastes like soap. It does, but he always pretended it didn't, just to annoy me. And I remember sitting alone at the dining table staring at his message, thinking how unusual it was because Fridays were his sacred, no work late days, something he'd always bragged about, swearing he'd never let corporate life steal another weekend from him after burning out in a previous job. And yet, there I was, reheating leftover pasta and pretending it didn't bother me as much as it did, telling myself maybe he had a deadline or maybe someone on his team messed up and he had to fix it. Because that's what you do when you're in love. You explain the things that don't add up so they can fit inside the version of the person you want them to be. A version that feels safe, familiar, predictable, even when reality is quietly whispering that something is off. But then the little things kept coming, subtle but sharp. Like the night he came home smelling faintly of a woman's perfume. Not floral like mine, but something deeper. Musky, expensive, the kind you'd find at the Nordstrom beauty counters downtown. And when I teased new cologne, he just laughed it off, saying he walked past a lady in the elevator who bathed in the stuff. But the thing about lies is they always leave a residue, and I couldn't shake how he immediately stripped off his shirt and tossed it into the laundry hamper like it was radioactive, rushing through the shower without kissing me like he normally did, acting jittery in a way I'd never seen before, tapping his foot under the water pressure like he was rinsing guilt off his skin instead of soap. Then came the phone thing, and anyone who has ever dated a man hiding something knows exactly what I mean. The sudden tilting of the screen away from me when a notification pops up. The subtle locking of the phone the moment you walk into the room. The new passcode he forgot to mention. The half-second panic in his eyes when he realizes you noticed, followed by a laugh that sounds too casual to be real. For 3 years, Liam had been an open book phone guy, leaving his screen face down only because it annoyed him when it lit up in the dark. But now he guarded it like it held nuclear codes, even taking it with him to the bathroom, which he never did before. And I catch myself staring at the door, listening to him type while brushing my teeth, wondering when exactly trust had become an archaeological artifact I was trying to dig up inside our apartment. Still, I wasn't ready to consider the possibility that something was truly wrong. Instead, I blamed work stress, seasonal depression, Mercury retrograde, anything except the idea that the man I loved might be lying to me, because once you open the door to that thought, it's almost impossible to close it again. The next crack showed up on a random Tuesday when I found a receipt in his jeans pocket while doing laundry. It was from a restaurant in Capitol Hill that we'd never been to. A trendy little place I'd actually suggested months before and he'd claimed was too pretentious. Yet the receipt was for 2 cocktails, an entree, and dessert. And even though my brain tried to rationalize it, maybe he met a client, maybe it was a team dinner, the total was too low for a business meal, too intimate for a casual hangout, and the timestamp was 8:17 p.m. Right in the window, he told me he was stuck in traffic coming home. I didn't confront him because I wasn't ready to hear whatever explanation he would give, and I already knew in my stomach that it wouldn't be the truth. Instead, I tucked the receipt into a drawer like evidence for a trial I hoped I'd never have to attend. A week later, the second apartment key appeared. Silver, plain, attached to a flimsy circular ring with a little scratch across the surface. And when I asked, "What's this for?" Liam didn't even blink. He just said it was for a coworker who asked him to water plants during a trip. Acting so casual, so annoyingly unbothered, as if that made sense. As if adults casually handed out apartment keys to semi-casual colleagues like party favors. And I swear something in my chest tightened so sharply, it almost felt like my heart was warning me not to swallow that lie. But once again, I forced myself to nod along, telling myself I was being dramatic, that trust meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt, but deep down I already knew that trust shouldn't feel like choking down something that tastes poisonous. The final crack, the one that split everything wide open, came 2 nights later when I heard him in the living room after midnight whispering into his phone, his voice low, soft, tender in a way he hadn't spoken to me in months. And I only caught fragments through the door. "I miss you too. I wish I could be there soon, I promise." And my entire body froze like an animal hearing a predator in the bushes, because I knew that tone. I knew it intimately. It was the voice he used with me when we first fell in love, when he'd call just to hear my laugh, when he'd whisper goodnight, like the words themselves kept him tethered to me. I stood there, barefoot, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. And for the first time, I didn't try to explain it away. Didn't blame work, stress, or bad timing, or the universe being in a weird mood. No, this time, I let the truth settle over me like cold water. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I couldn't pretend anymore. When he finally hung up, I slipped silently back into bed, staring at the ceiling while he crawled beside me like nothing had happened, kissing my shoulder before falling asleep instantly, while I lay there with my eyes open, realizing the version of him I loved might not even be real. The next morning, I looked at him over breakfast, studying his face, his easy smile, his relaxed posture, the way he buttered his toast, like he wasn't living an entirely different life behind my back. And something inside me hardened. Not with anger yet, but with clarity, with resolve, because I knew I couldn't keep living in this fog of denial. I didn't say a word at the table. I didn't confront him or beg for explanations or ask who he missed at midnight, because I finally understood something important. If I asked him outright, he'd lie, and I wasn't interested in collecting more lies. I wanted the truth. And if I wanted the truth, I'd have to find it myself. Quietly, carefully, patiently. So as he kissed my forehead and rushed out the door, claiming he was running late for a meeting, I stood there, watching him leave, my heart steady for the first time in weeks, because I'd already made my decision. I wasn't going to be naive. I wasn't going to be blind. I wasn't going to be the girl who cried into her pillow, hoping love would magically fix itself. No. I was done giving him the benefit of the doubt. Done ignoring the cracks. Done pretending the fractures in our life weren't turning into faults that could swallow me whole. I was going to find out what was going on, no matter how painful the truth turned out to be, no matter what it destroyed, because something told me that whatever he was hiding, it was bigger than a simple lie, bigger than a single betrayal, and if I didn't uncover it now, it would eventually destroy me, and I refused to let that happen. I couldn't sleep that night, staring at the ceiling with Liam's words echoing in my mind. "I miss you too," over and over, each repetition, like a hammer striking the fragile trust I had once felt in our apartment. And I realized that if I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to stop feeling like my own life was being edited behind my back, I had to step into detective mode to become someone I didn't recognize yet, someone sharp and calculating, because love no longer mattered, only truth did. And so I started small, tracking his location with the app he thought I didn't know about, watching his movements on my phone as he claimed he was stuck in a client meeting downtown, when in reality he zigzagged through the city streets like a man trying to avoid invisible spotlights. And every detour he took made my stomach knot, every pause in a random parking lot a flashing red warning light, until I started mapping out his pattern, recognizing the rhythm of his lies, the way he repeated excuses that didn't add up, until it became undeniable that his life was split, bifurcated in ways I hadn't even imagined. And then there was the second phone, hidden under the seat of his car like a time bomb waiting to go off. And unlocking it was a surreal mixture of adrenaline and dread, the kind you feel when opening a forbidden box. And I discovered text after text to a woman named Jamie, words dripping with intimacy, familiarity, and a casual ease Liam had never shown me in years of dating. Messages that revealed dinners, trips, private jokes, and a relationship I had been blind to, and my heart froze. Not with betrayal at first, but with disbelief. Because how could someone live a double life so seamlessly, so methodically, that the other person has no clue while you're still pretending to be a faithful partner? And yet the evidence piled up. Bank statements showing transfers to her name, a lease signed under a pseudonym for an apartment in Capitol Hill, travel itineraries for flights that didn't exist in my world but existed in hers, and every piece connected like a puzzle too cruel to be accidental. And so I did what I had to do, visiting that apartment under the guise of a delivery mistake, pretending to be a new tenant asking questions for a friend, and when the door opened, there she was. Jamie Thompson, 26, with wide eyes that mirrored my own horror, clutching a coffee cup and staring at me like she had walked into the wrong dimension. And the moment our eyes met, the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air, but there was no anger between us. Only shock, grief, and an immediate recognition that we had been played by the same man. And she told me she thought Liam was hers, that they had been together for 2 years, celebrating anniversaries, sharing dreams, and the sound of her voice cracked me open because it mirrored all the moments I had assumed were ours alone. And suddenly, the world felt doubled, layered, suffocating, but instead of blaming each other, we leaned into each other, forming a fragile alliance, a mutual pact that we would uncover the truth together, step by step, unraveling the web of deception like archaeologists carefully brushing away dust from a delicate relic. And what we found next was almost laughable in its cruelty. Liam had duplicated everything, duplicated promises, duplicated dates, duplicated love notes, even duplicated arguments, sending each of us texts that mirrored the other, creating an illusion of sincerity. And I remember flipping through the screenshots she had on her phone, laughing nervously at the absurdity, the horror, the precision, and realizing just how meticulous he had been, how he had compartmentalized his entire existence so that neither of us would catch on too early. And the more we dug, the more layers appeared. Calendars filled with overlapping dinners, reservations under aliases, photos where one version of him smiled for me while the other smiled for her. Gifts we had both received that were identical in every way, a cruel symmetry that made me shiver. But instead of succumbing to despair, I felt a surge of clarity, because now that we had each other, we could start connecting the dots without being manipulated. And together, we traced back months, even years of lies, piecing together how he managed to juggle 2 lives. The level of planning it took to remember which lie he told to whom. The lies about family events, work emergencies, late nights, spontaneous trips, all orchestrated to keep us in ignorance. And the weight of it was overwhelming. But having Jamie by my side softened the edges of shock, her presence a mirror reflecting my own disbelief. And we started cataloging everything, laughing bitterly at the cruelty, crying quietly at the betrayal, sharing a sense of camaraderie born not from friendship, but from a shared trauma. And in that cramped apartment in Capitol Hill, surrounded by traces of his double life, I felt a strange empowerment, because for the first time I wasn't alone in knowing the truth, and together, piece by piece, we were dismantling his world in our minds, imagining the confrontation that would someday make everything fall apart, while also discovering subtle details we hadn't noticed before. Duplicated plans that overlapped with dates of our own anniversary celebrations, gifts addressed in ambiguous handwriting, photos with both of us framed the same way. And each revelation made me more determined, more methodical, more focused, because it wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming the narrative he had stolen from both of us. And somewhere between grief and rage, I realized that I was no longer the naive girl who trusted blindly. I was the woman who could track him, document him, expose him, and though we hadn't yet confronted him, Jamie and I already felt a unity that Liam could never sever, an alliance born of betrayal but tempered in resolve. And I remember feeling the strangest mixture of empathy and superiority, because while he thought he was clever, we were becoming unstoppable. And in those moments, late nights turning into early mornings, sipping stale coffee in his hidden apartment, while comparing notes and photos, I felt a clarity that cut through the fog of love and manipulation. And I knew that whatever came next, we were ready. We had the truth, and we had each other, which was infinitely more powerful than anything he could throw at us. And yet, even with that clarity, the ache in my chest never fully went away, because I had loved him, had trusted him, and it was impossible not to mourn the version of myself that believed in him completely, the girl who thought love could protect her from deceit. And that mourning made me stronger, sharper, more vigilant. And as the sun rose over the Seattle skyline, streaming light across his carefully hidden apartment, I realized that this was the beginning of something larger, something decisive, because no longer were we just victims of a man's duplicity. Now we were detectives, strategists, women armed with proof, poised to take back control. And even though I had only just uncovered half the story, even though the final confrontation had not yet come, I felt an electric anticipation coursing through me, because I knew that Liam's carefully constructed double life would not survive once we chose to confront it. And for the first time in weeks, I slept that morning with a sense of purpose. Not naive hope, not denial, but power, clarity, and the fierce determination to see everything revealed. And that's when I knew nothing would ever be the same. And I was finally ready to fight for the truth. I never imagined I would spend my nights in someone else's apartment, combing through the fragments of a man's life like a forensic investigator. Yet there I was, shoulder to shoulder with Jamie, scrolling through his phones, cross-referencing emails, and cataloging every shred of evidence we could find, feeling my heart beat faster with each discovery, each screenshot, each carefully hidden message revealing a layer of deception so meticulously constructed that it was almost impressive if it weren't so cruel. And as we sifted through photo after photo, some innocuous, some intimate, I began to feel a transformation within myself. The hurt and confusion that had kept me up for weeks slowly being replaced by a razor-sharp focus, a determination that left no room for tears, no room for pity, because if Liam thought he could manipulate two women, control two lives, and keep everything hidden, he was sorely mistaken. And so we started methodically, creating folders labeled by date and by victim, screenshotting every text, every location ping, every flight itinerary, every receipt, every audio recording where his voice betrayed the duplicity he couldn't hide, logging bank statements showing payments to both our accounts and piecing together the overlap of dates, gifts, dinners, and trips, each new piece of evidence hammering the point home. This man had lived two parallel lives with no regard for the consequences, and with every file we added, I felt the quiet, simmering power of knowledge, a kind of power that doesn't scream but builds quietly, ready to explode at the perfect moment. And we weren't just gathering evidence for catharsis. We were orchestrating something precise, a plan so deliberate that it felt almost surgical, because it wasn't revenge we sought. It was justice. The truth revealed in one night that would leave no room for ambiguity, no excuses, no lies to slip through the cracks. And as Jamie and I discussed the logistics, we mapped the perfect night. The place would be a private dining room, neutral territory, secure and enclosed, where we could control every detail, every entry and exit, and we scripted the sequence of revelations with meticulous attention, deciding who would say what, when, and how, timing each piece of evidence so that Liam would feel the walls of his world collapse in real time. And even though I felt my pulse spike at the thought of confrontation, I knew that my calm would be our weapon, that my composure would ensure the plan worked, and so we coordinated, inviting only the people who mattered, friends he had lied to, witnesses to his duplicity, people who could verify what he had tried to hide, individuals whose reactions would punctuate the truth like punctuation in a sentence. And with every call I made, every confirmation of attendance, I felt the weight of control settling onto my shoulders, not as a burden, but as liberation. Because I was no longer the girl who had sat in bed hoping for an honest answer. I was the woman in charge, the one who held the map to his destruction in my hands. And as the days ticked closer to the appointed night, we refined every detail, rehearsing phrases, testing reactions, planning contingencies for the excuses he might throw at us, the gaslighting he was sure to attempt, the disbelief he would feign. And in doing so, I noticed something else changing inside me. My fear of confrontation evaporated, replaced by a cold, strategic patience. The kind of patience that waits for the right moment to strike. The kind that knows that the perfect execution is infinitely more powerful than a hasty explosion. And as Jamie and I worked through lists of evidence, location logs, overlapping calendars, and audio recordings of conversations where his voice melted with false intimacy toward both of us, we realized just how deep his duplicity went, the level of planning and memory it took to keep our lives separate yet interconnected. And I found myself studying his patterns, memorizing the cadence of his excuses, the timing of his calls, the phrases he used to manipulate each of us. And with each observation, I felt a sense of control settle over me, like a chess player who finally sees all the moves before the opponent does. And once we had assembled the evidence, I created a master file, combining photos, screenshots, messages, bank statements, emails, and recordings into a single archive. Labeled and organized, each piece cross-referenced and corroborated, so that when the night came, nothing would be left to chance, nothing would be ambiguous, and when he walked into that room, he would see his entire world laid bare, and it would collapse instantaneously, perfectly and without mercy. And as we tested our plan, running through scenarios where he might panic, deny, or deflect, I realized that what we were doing was not just about him. It was about reclaiming our own narratives, about rewriting the story he had tried to control, about transforming the pain, betrayal, and heartbreak into a precise instrument of truth. And every rehearsal, every phone call, every piece of evidence placed meticulously into the archive strengthened my resolve, honed my focus, and reinforced the certainty that this night, this confrontation would not fail. And even as adrenaline coursed through me with the thought of seeing him for the first time since knowing the full scope of his lies, I felt calm, coldly determined, the hurt and vulnerability of the past weeks replaced by a strategic clarity that guided every action, every decision, every choice we made in planning the night. And as Jamie and I sat side by side in the Capitol Hill apartment, going over each timeline, each piece of proof, each contingency, I finally recognized the transformation within myself. The girl who had loved blindly and been betrayed was gone, replaced by a woman who could wield evidence like a sword, who could orchestrate truth like a symphony, who could engineer an exposure so complete that he would be powerless to defend himself. And in that moment, I felt the intoxicating combination of fear and empowerment, knowing that the next step, the night we had planned, would mark the end of his control, the end of his lies, and the beginning of our reclamation of life, dignity, and justice. And even as the final details were ironed out, the guest list, the order of revelations, the timing of every piece of evidence, the sequencing of reactions, the placement of witnesses, I felt a sense of inevitability settle in. The knowledge that everything we had done, every meticulous detail, every sleepless night, every emotional toll was converging toward that single night. A night where Liam would be confronted with the unassailable truth of his double life. And when that moment came, I knew with absolute certainty that the arc of betrayal would snap, and he would face the consequences of every lie he had spun, every life he had tried to live in parallel, and I would stand there, unshaken, composed, holding nothing but evidence and truth. And with that power, I finally felt free. The night finally came, the culmination of weeks of planning, sleepless nights, meticulous evidence gathering, and quiet strategizing, and I felt a strange mixture of calm and adrenaline as I walked into the private dining room I had booked, the room softly lit, neutral and elegant, every table, chair, and lamp deliberately arranged so that nothing could distract from the truth. And as I set down the folders and devices containing the full archive of Liam's lies, Jamie arrived, carrying her own collection of screenshots, audio files, and evidence. And for a moment, we exchanged a glance that needed no words, a silent affirmation that we were ready, that what we were about to do was bigger than either of us, that it was about exposing deception, reclaiming our stories, and delivering the unvarnished truth. And then Liam arrived as unsuspecting as ever, smiling nervously, adjusting his tie, not realizing that the carefully constructed world he had lived in was about to implode in front of him. And as I greeted him with a polite, neutral tone, I could see the subtle shift in his posture, the slight hesitation in his eyes, the flicker of unease as he noticed unfamiliar faces, friends, colleagues, and even his parents, all people who had unknowingly been part of his web of lies. And yet he smiled, still thinking charm could smooth over whatever anxiety he felt. And then I began, calmly, methodically, explaining that we had something to show him, evidence that would clarify years of confusion. And as I opened the first folder, revealing screenshots of messages that were unmistakably intimate, dates and plans he had lied about, my voice steady, emotionless, precise, I watched the first crack appear in his composure, a subtle tightening around the eyes, a nervous twitch of a hand, and then Jamie followed, providing her side, the corroborating evidence, audio recordings, where his voice melted with false affection toward both of us, and suddenly the room shifted, the weight of revelation settling over everyone like a heavy curtain. And as we moved on, revealing bank transfers, duplicated leases, overlapping reservations, carefully orchestrated events he had thought we would never notice, I watched as recognition dawned on his face, the charm slipping, the casual deflection vanishing, replaced by a raw, unshielded panic. And I felt a strange detachment as the full picture emerged, Liam's world unraveling piece by piece, his reputation disintegrating in real time, friends whispering to one another, parents looking at him with a mixture of shock and disappointment, colleagues processing the evidence of his duplicity, and still, I did not raise my voice, did not cry, did not plead, because there was no need. The evidence spoke louder than anything words could, and each document, each photo, each recording hit him like a hammer, the weight of his deception crashing down, and as he tried to deflect, tried to justify, tried to weave excuses, the room collectively rejected them, the proof too comprehensive, too undeniable, too brutal in its clarity, and I continued, revealing flight logs, overlapping anniversaries, gifts addressed ambiguously to obscure which life they belonged to, messages that duplicated intimate phrases, calendars that mirrored each other, and for every revelation, the reaction in the room intensified, a chorus of disbelief, betrayal, and quiet satisfaction. And Jamie reinforced every point, her calm, precise explanations punctuating my own, leaving him unable to escape, unable to manipulate, unable to hide. And as I laid out the final pieces, the emails to both of us planning trips, the recorded conversations with friends and family confirming lies, the screenshots of texts where he discussed one life while pretending loyalty to the other, I saw the complete collapse, the way his shoulders slumped, the color draining from his face, his eyes darting from person to person, realizing that the carefully curated dual existence he had maintained with such precision had failed spectacularly. And in that moment, the power shifted entirely, not to anger, not to revenge, but to truth, and I felt a quiet triumph, a sense of liberation that came from exposing manipulation without losing myself in hatred or rage. And as I closed the final folder, I took a deep breath, feeling the room settle around the revelation. Jamie by my side, nodding slightly, our alliance cemented in the shared experience of uncovering a man's duplicity, and then, without a word, I stood, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the exit, leaving Liam stunned, humiliated, and stripped bare of every illusion he had relied on. And as I stepped outside into the cool Seattle night, the air brushing against my face, I realized that the weight that had pressed against my chest for weeks, fear, heartbreak, confusion, was gone, replaced by clarity and power. And I knew that healing would not be instant, that there would be therapy sessions, long conversations with friends, moments of doubt and reflection. But for the first time in months, I felt untethered from manipulation, free from lies, and capable of rebuilding not just my life, but my sense of self-worth. And as I walked home under the quiet hum of the city, I smiled softly, knowing that Liam's era of deception had ended. My truth had been spoken, and heartbreak had not broken me. Instead, it had freed me, allowing me to rediscover my strength, my voice, and my own story. And as I opened my apartment door and felt the warmth of familiar walls around me, I realized that this night was not just an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of reclaiming every part of my life that had been shadowed by lies. The start of building friendships, pursuing passions, and living unapologetically. A testament to the fact that surviving betrayal doesn't just require resilience, it requires courage. And that courage I now knew was mine to end.